Senator Obika, you have 14 minutes remaining.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So, in effect, as I continue on this Petroleum investing bill, we ask the question, how does this new setup impact on the Trinidad and Tobago model? This final question could be telling if national suspicion becomes a reality and that the reins of the refinery falls eventually into the hands of foreigners. Whilst we know of a company incorporated by or through the benevolence of Mr. Espinet, if I could use that word, we don't know what exactly would be the particular and peculiar circumstances under which our crude will be refined in Pointe-à-Pierre. So the question still stands, okay? How does this new setup impact on what is accepted globally as the Trinidad and Tobago energy model? And how does the arithmetic add up regarding obtaining foreign exchange in the meantime, and eventually to sustain not only our energy model, but our national economy? I ask the question again. So there are some questions on energy security. The government is on record as saying the first cargo of Trinidad and Tobago crude was successfully exported on the 1st of November 2018. And the price was alluded to, not specifically in this House today. But these utterances beg questions. Was that land-based crude, marine crude, from which particular wells? So I am hearing the Honorable Minister. I'm sure he would detail that in his presentation. Now, how was the payment secured? This is important because, of course, when one deals in Forex, we understand and we must appreciate that a lot of foreign exchange transactions may not necessarily find its way directly into our banking sector in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's a question that has merit. How was the payment secured? What was the volume of crude exported? The Minister has mentioned 500,000 barrels by 3. I understand the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance spoke of West Texas International. I'm not sure what benchmark crude that is, but I'm familiar with West Texas Intermediate. So I just want to correct the record where that is concerned. Now, detriment number 4. Taxpayers will bear the liabilities of Petroleum. The majority of the liabilities of Petroleum, as I stated at the beginning of my presentation, will be borne by the taxpayers. All right? And that really is as a direct result, Mr. Vice President, of PNM corruption, incompetence, mismanagement of our resources under a cabinet that some of the members in today's cabinet were part of. So the liabilities are not being transferred. This is a disturbing development, Mr. Vice President. So as Senator Vieira mentioned, that Petroleum basically will be a shell company. And as it's a shell company, and no mention was made of any fees to be ascribed to Petroleum, no mention was made of any management arrangement where Petroleum in its current form, well, in its eventual form, would generate revenues. One has to assume that that will simply be a company on the books, a company in name, but not in reality. So the taxpayers will be left to pay, to find money, to pay in excess of what is 250 million US today and 850 million US. 2 bonds. One bond which is being serviced and the other which only the interest was being paid because of the incompetence in at least fixing a proper rate, 9.5%, when we could have gotten better. So when you follow this line of investigation to its final conclusion, you observe the major debts being left in the shell company, Petroleum. And permit me to read from the Minister of Finance from the debate in the House, if I can so do. It's a very short part. Section 4 also allowed for certain other rights. This is the The Petroleum Investing Act, Section 4 of that Act, also allowed for certain other rights, obligations, and liabilities of Trintoc and Trintopec to be transferred to Petrotrin. These included an approved fund, plan, or scheme under the Income Tax Act, all financial accounts, all power of attorney instruments, all negotiable instrument or order of payment of money, any security held for the payment or discharge of debt, so anything that has encumbrances, liability or obligation, any judgment or award obtained by or against Trintoc or Trintopec, and all contracts of employment. So basically, in the words of Wilfred Espini, all. All. With respect to the liabilities of Petrotrin. To compound the fault, so the Minister of Finance is on a record saying the process is identical, where he said, what was done in the early 1990s when the assets of Trintoc and Trintopec were vested in the newly created Petrotrin, it is identical. So I want to state for the public record that that is totally false, and if it were, we would not, as taxpayers, be straddled with the $850 million US bond and the residual balance, which is $250 million US. We understand on the other bond, which matures in 2022, which cycles out, sorry, in 2022. So I'm saying the process is not identical and will be to the harm and the detriment of our national savings as a country and our debt profile, because these things would increase our debt to GDP. So I want to also comment on the recent increase in Petrotrin's debt profile. The Minister of Finance is on record publicly lamenting that Petrotrin has incurred debt backed by the state with regard to this particular bill in question, as recent as a month ago. And this is the argument being advanced, Mr. Vice President. This is the argument to make a case for vesting these lands, our national patrimony, into these companies. So this is a weak point, Mr. Vice President, because the government, had it not closed down Petrotrin, there clearly would have been opportunities for Petrotrin to sustain its obligations, whilst, based on the arrangements, they may be required to obtain Minister of Finance oversight in terms of government guarantees, because the debts incurred by Petrotrin would be explicitly backed by the government, which impacts on our debt to GDP. In effect, Petrotrin on its own would have been able to foot the bills. Now, so what I'm saying is that the Minister of Finance, instead of saying that it's Petrotrin who couldn't pay, you have closed down the company. If you've closed down the company, they've stopped refining crude, they've stopped exporting fuel products, they've stopped producing. How can you reasonably expect them to pay any bills? So the Minister of Finance, through his incompetence and the government's incompetence, has resulted in what he has recorded as an increase in our debt to GDP by 1%. So, Mr. Vice President, detriment number 5. There are uncertain exit costs for Petrotrin, which has become a charge on the state. Now, Senator Ramdeen outlined in detail the millions, the tens of millions, the hundreds of millions, simply for advisory services, in many cases, and in one case, just a signature regarding this whole Petrotrin fiasco. This is bigger than AV drilling, Mr. Vice President. So there are uncertain exit costs.
Senator, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Which even the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago in its November Monetary Policy Report 2018 have flagged as significant risk factors. And to compound this level of secrecy, this government has not given the true cost of startup of the new entities. So Central Bank is saying that the government must manage two things. One, the transition costs moving from Petrotrin to these new companies, and they have flagged that, Mr. Vice President, as a significant risk factor going forward in this economy. And they have also said, greater than that in terms of risk, is that the government must get to work on a capital expenditure program regarding the upstream energy sector fast. Otherwise, it would significantly negatively impact on our revenue stream. So what this government has done is taken an economy where the price of oil is buoyant at about $70 US a barrel, which is excellent in this era, where they should have been generating significant flows, inflows. And now they have turned this situation into a company that is all but dead. The workers are near death, wondering where their next meal will come from, come December 25th and after, and a country that is in crisis. So, Mr. Vice President, I want to ask some questions regarding the consortium, Credit Suisse, Gladex, FCB, Morgan Stanley, and some merchant bank, and so on, to refinance or reschedule, whichever proper term would arise based on the way they treat the transaction of the two bonds, whether it be to reschedule or to refinance. The first tranche of exit costs. What is the rate of interest? What will be the rate of interest that the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago will be made to bear? Clearly, it cannot be 9.5%. What is the term of the restructured facility? What penalties may arise should the state, or Petrotrin in this case, fail to honor obligations? And how does this impact on our national debt to GDP? Now, Mr. Vice President, I want to take the last few minutes of my time to remind persons from whence we came. I want to remind them that this country, Trinidad and Tobago, belongs to us, the people. And in the words of the leader of an organization that I was born into, this land is ours. That man is Makandal Daga. So the land that belongs, that PSAL and the ministry officials directed by government have so callously sought to claim as theirs, breaking down the homes of persons who've been there for generations. Those lands don't belong to them. They belong to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to say this, how wicked can it be? The person, Mr. Aki, whose house was destroyed, he himself is an employer of Petrotrin at Trinma. So is it that you're saying that you're going to be preparing lands for the persons in Trinma, as another rumor that has surfaced? There are persons hearing so many rumors, Mr. Vice President. That is another rumor, that the lands are going to be farmed out, similar to, in the case of Caroni, to the ex-workers of Petrotrin. So if that was the case, could you not stay the execution of that and allow Mr. Aki and his family and his children to remain in their houses? That is the most wicked act. And you put workers, Mr. Vice President, to go and break down the house of a worker. I mean, there can be no other level of wickedness. So I want to remind the population of the 6 areas of detriment. The first, job losses. The second detriment, the economy will be in tatters, as we have seen from the Energy Chamber's pronouncement of 400 companies. This is not parlors around the corner, Mr. Vice President. The third detriment is energy insecurity. The fourth is that the major liabilities of Petrotrin will be borne by us, the taxpaying citizens, while Wiley gets away scot-free with our crown jewels. The fifth detriment is that there are uncertain exit costs, which Senator Ramdin has shown to be in millions. And the sixth is that this entire process outlined in this bill will be negative to our national spirit as Trinidad and Tobago citizens. And I want to say this last point. I want to call out the Association of Caribbean Energy Specialists. They must make a statement. They must come out and condemn this action to bring foreigners illegally to run our national crown jewel. And they must call out this government on this wicked and corrupt practice and end this charade today. We cannot support this bill. Thank you.
Senator Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for recognizing me and for the opportunity to make a short contribution to this miscellaneous provisions, Heritage Petroleum, Paria Fuel Trading, and Guaracara Refining Vesting Bill 2018. But if by your leave, if you just allow me a couple of minutes to ruminate on giving thanks. You know, I've gotten quite a bit of pecan since the afternoon began. And I just want to say, you know, I couldn't write this script. I give God thanks and praise for the blessing and the opportunity to continue to serve in this august house. I don't take it for granted for 1 minute. It is an honor. And also, I would like to also thank Her Excellency for allowing me to continue serving on this honorable bench. And with that said, it would be remiss of me not to thank for their service and sacrifice my immediate past colleagues, including Senators Raful, Kreese, Sri Kisoon, Ram Kisoon, Roach, Small, and Mahabir. And I think they all deserve our commendations for their service to the country and their sacrifice, because anyone who sits in here or has the opportunity to serve here knows it's not an easy task, and it's a lot of sacrifice. And I want to also take the opportunity to welcome the new colleagues, including Senators Dr. Dylan Remy, Senator Thompson Ai, Senator Teemal, Senator C. Prasad, Senator Deoroop, Senator Deyalsingh. Welcome back, Senator Vieira, and of course, continue with my colleague, Senator Chute. So welcome, and we wish you all the best for great contributions to the country. Mr. Vice President, through you, you know, a very short intervention on this this bill. And the intervention is not necessarily in the form of statements or revelations like Senator Ramdeen, but it's more in the arena of questions for Honorable Minister West and Minister Khan, who I think is coming up in short term. And just for a layperson looking on, you know, one of the issues that many have in such a significant endeavor, and I believe it's any administration's right to do what the population elected them to do, and do what they think is in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That's why people are elected. That's why people elect a government to lead, to govern, and to make decisions on their behalf. I think where the questions come in is when there's a lack of information. And I know this is an evolving process, but and information is coming to hand as negotiations are ongoing and things are happening, but it doesn't help the scenario. And as a matter of fact, it opens the door for misinformation, one, and we're in an environment with that, and also information that sometimes is presented with shock value that can be exploited in nefarious ways. So I think it's in the best interest for us as a country and us as a parliament to keep in mind that information, particularly when it comes to complex issues like this, because this Petrotrin issue is a very complex issue. I am not an energy expert, and neither are most of the people in Trinidad and Tobago. And very often, the information that comes out is inconsistent, and it's not strategically planned so that the population has a sense of ease. People will disagree. People will disagree from time to time, but I think more information and more consistent information will go a long way in easing people's uncertainty and anxiety about significant moves, and this is a significant move. Through you, Mr. Vice President, as I said, my intervention is really based on question. What have we learned from Petrotrin past? What have we learned that we can apply to these new companies? Because as Winston Churchill said, any country that doesn't understand where it's come from or its past is doomed to repeat the issues of the problems of the future, the challenges of the future. And a lot has been said about Petrotrin and where we are today, a lot of it very credible information. But what have we learned from Petrotrin? And we can go back and forth as to who's to blame and whose administration made what decision. The point is that we're here. And given a cursory look at the information, even if you're not trained, we will know that Petrotrin posed a significant threat to the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. But what have we learned that we can apply moving forward? Petrotrin was once the jewel of our economy, and now it's become akin to a financial loose that needs to be cut and disaggregated. So, other questions? And I know Senator Ramdeen indicated some of his revelations with costs. What are the total shutdown costs? Total, inclusive of packages, disaggregated from debt, revenue lost in transition, and inclusive of startup costs for these 4 new companies. You know, when the public hears this in the context of the bullet payments that are owed, the 12 billion debt, they can make a more rational judgment as to whether this was a productive decision in the interest of the country's protection moving forward and mitigating and minimizing the exposure that we face, given what has been articulated about Petroleum past moving forward, regardless of who's to blame and what decision. And I'm not saying those things are not important, because they are important, because governance structures are also in question here as to what happened and why it happened. So what are the startup costs of the 4 new companies projected and budgeted? What are the timelines for full startup, attainment of half and full capacity? I know based on the budget presentation recently debated in the other place and in this August House, there's a projection, and quote, over the period 2019 to 2021, production of crude is expected to rise to 77,500 barrels of oil per day, contributing significantly to the increased economic activity. In addition, exploration and production activities and by BHP Billiton's Ruby Delaware project could push our annual combined production of oil to 100,000 barrels of oil per day. Great projections, but what are we putting in place to ensure that? Because projections are great, but as we've seen through the history of Trinidad and Tobago, we are not good at executing or maintaining efficiency in Trinidad and Tobago. So what have we learned about governance structures, boards of directors of Petroleum past, present executive and staff costs that we can apply to the new companies moving forward? Because now, if we were exposed, and we have been exposed by one company, imagine if that kind of mismanagement, bad governance, is multiplied by 4. We are exposed to 4 times the amount if the governance structures aren't in place to make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. You know? And are these 4 companies now, and their outputs and their timelines for delivery of half and full capacity, now going to impact the budgetary projections from the energy sector all the way up gas-based economy? What is the impact of these and the transition period to start up in these entities and their output, their projected output? What is the impact of what has been articulated recently in the budget? And I said before, and to me this is very important through you, Mr. Vice President, what governance structures are we employing to avoid the types of negligence and mismanagement? Because, you know, when you hear of, and I don't know if this is the plan going forward, when you hear of, we've heard in the past of the exposure that interlocking directorships have cost this country in the private and public sector. So when you hear 1 and 2 people are on the boards of all the companies, it raises red flags, because this country has been exposed by that sort of governance arrangements in the past. And it may not be a permanent situation, but certainly there's no information coming out that it's not going to be. And now we have, in addition to 4 boards, costs for 4 executives, 4 sets of executives, I should say. How is this factored into the viability and profitability moving forward? Because I'll always say, it's great to make plans for now, but we have to put systems in place for transparency, accountability, monitoring for anyone who may come to power in Trinidad and Tobago. And if we leave these loose arrangements moving forward, we did a similar exercise with BWIA many years ago. And from the information coming from the Honorable Senator West, we're only now starting to see the light of day with CAL, almost 10 years later. So the projections for the change from BWIA to CAL continued loss-producing entity for a decade. And that wasn't the projection then. Who's to say that this is going to materialize? And I'm not saying it's not, but the information is lacking, so that we have to ask ourselves what is in place to make sure there's efficiency and accountability, and timelines are kept, and benchmarks are kept. What legislative and other systems are we putting in place for continuity? One of the major significant problems facing Trinidad and Tobago is continuity of policy past different administration and different political cycles. So one administration starts this, and the other administration was opposed to it while in opposition, and the political cycle or governance changes, and we go back to square one and start something else. What are we putting in place for continuity? There are several models that we can employ from around the world. Panama, Germany, and the way their legislative structures have been changed and enacted to ensure that there is continuity when significant, because this is no small feat that we're trying to accomplish here. this is one of the most significant parts of our economy, more so than coal. So we have to put systems in place to deal with that. And finally, because I did say it was going to be a very short intervention, what I think is I'm surprised that it's not an opportunity that was exploited in this realm because of the articulations of the budget in terms of renewable energy. So we have Heritage Petroleum for production and exploration, Paria fuel trading, and Guaracara refining resting. And to me, this was a golden opportunity to chart the course for creating a company to deal effectively and assiduously with renewable and green energies, because it's an energy company. And I think it's a missed opportunity, because if you're going to create new companies with specific purposes, we could have done that here, because it would have shown a kind of innovation and vision that the rest of the world is following through. When you look at, and I quote, OECD 2016 Better Policies for Sustainable Development, a framework for policy coherence, you see that the world economy is changing drastically over the coming years, and by 2050, global economic output is projected to nearly quadruple. And a large part of that is, this article is the world economy could be using up to 80% energy produced by predominantly fossil fuels, and greenhouse gas emissions as a byproduct. But the countries that are forward-thinking, are already putting systems in place to, one, come off of fossil fuels and wean themselves off, which I know Minister Khan is not going to happen overnight. But certainly a parallel system could be in place for the development of a really fervent green economy and innovation. We're an island. We have sea, we have wind, we have sunlight, but we really have not made significant strides in terms of exploiting the renewable energy and dealing with the innovation that comes with that. In closing, Mr. Vice President, you know, one of the articles I saw, and I want to quote, is an article that focused on Ghana and the top 10 global factors for project and sector failure of 2015. It's by Damore, Isaac, Akwi, and Muzungi. And there are 10 basic areas for project failure of this magnitude in any jurisdiction. And they are leadership and poor planning, poor execution, a lack of proper monitoring mechanisms to ensure that timelines and output targets are being met, poor governance structures, which I referenced earlier on, and weak oversight mechanisms, corruption, which we all knew too well about in Trinidad and Tobago, bureaucracy, political interference, change in government, a lack of continuity and policy direction, fluctuating global prices for goods and services, delays in payments, and government bureaucracy in payments of funds. So I think out of these 10, we could check about 6 or 7. So I say that to say, we have been down this road before in various sectors, but this one is extremely important to Trinidad and Tobago. And as Senator Bear indicated earlier on, philosophically, I'm not against it. The government had to make a decision, a critical decision, based on what faced the country in terms of petrochemicals, how it exposed the economy. What would provide more comfort to me is closing the gaps in some of these issues that I outlined today. And with those few words, Mr. Vice President, I thank you.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, it's an honor to join this debate on the short, I'll just read the short title. This act may be cited as a miscellaneous provisions, Heritage Petroleum, Paria fuel trading, and Guaracara refining Vesting Act 2018. Mr. Vice President, I wish I could crave your indulgence to ask Senator Paul Richards for his extra time to add to mine, because I have a lot to say if I have the time to say it. But before I begin, let me just congratulate the new independent senators for joining this August House. As leader of the government business in the House and on behalf of this side of the bench. And to say that probably after service to God, service the country is paramount. And we appreciate it as a government, and I assume the opposition does appreciate it also, for people who take time to come out here and serve the country. It's not a job with a lot of gratitude, but the gratitude comes from within.
That's right.
Mr. Vice President, I just want to clear up a couple of things before I really get into the bill. We have said over and over again, we are not shutting down Petroleum.
That's right.
We shut down Caroni Limited. And throughout the entire lower house, they're talking about Caroni. We were getting out of the sugar industry. Because nobody in the Caribbean after Lumi could survive in sugar. Guyana to some extent because there's wide land spaces. Barbados has a residual sugar industry. But beyond that, there's nothing. Because the fundamental changes in the international market made your industry obsolete. It happened with the rubber barons. And you just have to acclimatize yourself to a changing global environment. The biggest companies in the world today do not own assets. What does Amazon own? What does Google own? What does Microsoft own? What does Apple own? But they have the bulk of the wealth in the world. We are transforming the oil industry in particular. Senator Obika was saying Trinidad model. Trinidad model is not for oil. The Trinidad model is a gas model, which the world has come to recognize. We had a GCF meeting here last week. We came into high commendation. The whole of Africa, from Ghana to Nigeria to Mozambique to Tanzania to Equatorial Guinea, were in high praises that they are adapting their model to Trinidad gas. And our gas is based on incentivized upstream, a midstream sector, and a downstream sector that includes petrochemicals and liquefied natural gas. Where we have lost the plot is with oil. Because we were trapped in a cocoon of the past. We boast that we're in this oil business for 110 years. We have been in it for 110 years. But it has evolved. Look, I have a chart here. With your permission, I could just show it. That shows the evolution of petrotrade. It's like the evolution of Homo sapiens, you know. They come through all sorts of lineages. Starting with a company called UBOT, U-Bots, TLL, Trinidad Leaseholds, Apex Faizabad, KTO, that they involved into BP, Texaco, and Shell. That was the era of BP, Texaco, and Shell. They were the oil giants operating here. They left, went to the Middle East. Then we had the whole nationalization process, starting with the first national oil company was NPL, not Trinidad.
Right. Yeah.
After the big strike of 1971, when George Weeks locked down the country and the army had to come and distribute gas, I see my goodly Senator Sipa shaking her head. I was in Form 1 at the time. So I guess I don't want to see my age. That was a marketing arm. Then, 1974, the acquisition of Shell to form Trintoc, when Dr. William proudly raised the Trinidad and Tobago flag in Point Fortin. Then we had the acquisition of Texaco, the acquisition of Trinidad Tesoro. All that evolved in time to form Petrotrin. But there was a fundamental problem that we closed our eye at, we slighted, we looked the other way, and was something called the Point-a-Pier refinery. Because it employed people, and it got so ingrained in the society and the community and in the Trinidadian psyche, we couldn't believe that we could live without it. Those were the days of the mega Caribbean refinery that was refining for the fuel oil market. That's the bottom of the barrel. Fuel oil for power generation and fuel oil for ships. For those of you who could remember again, there were massive refineries in Aruba, in Curacao, in St. Croix, and in Trinidad. The very refinery in Point-a-Pierre here, we completed about 150,000 barrels a day throughput. In the heyday of Texaco, its throughput was 350,000 barrels of imported crude to service the eastern seaboard of the United States of America with fuel oil largely. When this fuel oil market became sour, what did Texaco do? They left. Again, the state entered, just as we entered with Tita and Lyle, bought Caroni, 1975 Limited, we bought the Texaco refinery. And at that point in time, there was probably some hope. We knew, and this is the crux of the matter, and I make no apologies for it, we knew the survival of this industry depended on an upgrade of the refinery. Successive administration invested heavily into that. The gas optimization plan, you got all the figures already. The GTL plant, the ultra-low sulfur diesel, those were attempts to upgrade the refinery to bring out a slate of products that had more value. Senator Richards hit the nail on the head. You look at Africa, project execution, project planning, project supervision, project oversight, a lack of project management and supervision. Trinidadians, not foreigners, you know, Trinidadians who were given the responsibility for doing that. It wasn't PNM, it wasn't UNC. We did it as a country, and we failed. It's something to be ashamed about. I am ashamed of it. I was an operator in the industry. But having said that, we cannot now come and lay blame. We have to take a deep breath, swallow our spit, so to speak, and decide to chart the right course. Petrotrin started with that model. But the world is awash with state oil companies. There's also examples you can draw on. There are those that are ahead of the class. There are those that are first in class, call it how you want. Saudi Aramco. Biggest company in the world. Bin Salman talking about an IPO for trillions of dollars, you know. QP, Qatar Petroleum, massive. I was in Qatar a couple of months ago. It is unbelievable, the power and size of that company. My favorite, Statoil. The Norwegians never seem to do anything wrong. We come back right home here. Petrobras transformed itself into an international organization. Granted, there were some challenges in the recent past with corruption and what have you, but by and large, it is still a well-run company. Pemex, Mexico. PDVSA, obviously, you know the story there, I will say no more. And a company I just want to refer to for 2 minutes, Ecopetrol, which is the Colombian state oil company. That company, through you, Mr. Vice President, has transformed itself into a world-class company. And the way they did it, they detached the company from the state and took strictly private sector approach to running it. They went out on an international recruiting drive, and they said they want the best. They don't, no matter how much they pay, what nationality you are. And today, Ecopetrol is one of the shining lights in Latin America. Ecopetrol has done so well that the entire Colombian economy, people looking at Colombia easily like that. Colombia has transformed itself in the last decade. You know.
I was there.
There was a time when Medellin and Cali cartel controlled Colombia. Today, Colombia is the prime destination for tourists in Latin America. So, countries who have the will to do it can do it. And under this administration, we think we have the will. But the refinery continue to hemorrhage money. And the losses were clouded by profits that were made in exploration and production. So what was published to the national community is the consolidated accounts of Petrotrin. So everybody bumping the gum and talking up and down the road and saying Petrotrin was making money. The refinery was losing X, ENP was making Y, and the overall profit was Y minus X. In 2012, Mr. Vice President, ENP lost 772 million. In 2013, it lost 2.8 billion. In 2014, it lost 2.63 billion. In 2015, it lost 2.72 billion. In 2016, it lost 1.3 billion. In 2017, 1.6 billion. Billion, not million. Overall loss of 11.5 billion TT dollars from 2012 to 2017 in 5 years. That, with the cost overruns of the whole GTL and the gas optimization plan, with the debt that is approximately almost $12 billion, it reached a point of no return. It has nothing to do with who wicked and who uncaring. That is the reality we faced as a government. What do you do? Put your hands in the air and tell the IMF, come and take it over? Or at least craft a plan that shows some salvation for the future. So what we did, we said this thing needs to be fundamentally restructured. We form a holding company, and we have 4 subsidiaries. Petrotrin to handle residual liabilities. That's corporate governance. And you form 3 new entities. The most important of these will be the Heritage Petroleum Company, which will be handling a profitable and potentially profitable exploration and production. Trading, Paria trading, buy fuel, bunker fuel, continue to service your CARICOM market and make a profit. Because again, industries change. There was a time when the vertically integrated oil company was the thing. Exxon, Mobil, Shell, BP. From the well to the pump. In fact, they went so far that they said the pump wasn't enough. The credit card to service the pump. So Shell had a credit card. But they realized there was value there too. So not only carrying you to the pump, you pay with your Shell credit card. So if you can't make the payment, you pay Shell interest. That's the way these companies think. What is emerging on the market now is trading. Because there's value to get in trading. This is how there's value to get at the credit card. So the people who buy and sell crude, LNG, gas, and petroleum products make a significant amount of money from the trading of these commodities. As they use arbitrage rates to get into various markets, buy cheap here, sell expensive there, get a deal on the spot market. Sometimes they pay more, sometimes they pay less. Play the futures market. And they take a chance on futures and say price will go up. But they're already locking a price for next year. If price goes down, they lose. If price goes up, they make a windfall. That's the nature of the industry. And I just want to explain one thing further. The fundamental difference between refining and marketing and exploration and production is the business model. I explained this to the country several months ago, but I will take the opportunity to explain it again. Exploration and production is a business based on profit, based on your operating costs and the price of crude. So if as a company, it is costing you $35 to produce a barrel of oil into the tank, and oil is selling for $50, you make $15 on a barrel. Simple arithmetic. Some complexities in between, but that's the gist of it. If oil drops to $35 a barrel, you break even. But what happens if oil goes to $100? You make a windfall profit. That's why there's something in law in Trinidad called supplemental petroleum tax. It's a windfall profit tax that says that that windfall profit is not because of you per se, but because of market condition, and the state is entitled to a part of that money. But in any event, if the price of oil stays high, you make super profits. What you do with that profit is have it in sinking funds, so that there will be a time in the market cycle that the oil price will be below than your operating cost. And that is the time you use your cash reserves to ride you through that period. The refinery business, on the other hand, is what you call a margins business. And the margin is the price between your raw material crude and the price of your refined products. So if it is costing you $50 to purchase crude, for every barrel of crude you refine, and you get $60 for the products, your gross margin is $10. Now that gross margin is virtually independent of price. So if oil price goes up to $100, product prices goes up commensurately with a little lag. So the refining business is not particularly sensitive to crude prices. It is sensitive to your margin, and your margin is based on the operating efficiency of your refinery. And there's something called your net margin, which is actually your profit, which is your gross margin minus your operating costs. And that's where we failed. So our net margin for the last 7 years has been between negative $0.2, I mean negative $2 to negative $5 US per barrel. So what that means, for the 150,000 barrels we refine every day, we lose between $2 to $5 US on every barrel. Can't come out of that. That is a debt trap for life. And that is the reason we pulled out the refinery assets into a company for international tender, for international attraction. Somebody will come and could come with a new business model, a new market, a new source of supply for crude. Run the refinery. The state will have some financial arrangement with them for the assets. Either they buy it, they lease it, or we work out some profit-sharing mechanism for them. So on the E&P side, we know what we're doing. Terminaling and trading, we don't have as much experience in it, but we recruit good people and play the market. And on the refining side, we sublet it to an international person or company of interest. And that's what we're doing, you know, with all the talk here and talk there and talk everywhere, and all the accusations and sinister plots and motives and what have you. I don't know from whence it came and from where it is going.
Nowhere.
But that's the long and short of this story. What more time I have again?
We finish at 6:09.
6:09, good. So, let me deal with this time with the actual vesting bill and the assets of Petrotrin. I will repeat some of what the Minister of Finance said to our point. But the vesting of the assets would be as follows. All the assets held by Petrotrin relative to exploration and production operations are to be transferred to the new exploration and production company Heritage. Straightforward. The Paliseco Agricultural Enterprises land that are used for exploration and production purposes will be transferred to Heritage Petroleum. All the assets of Petrotrin relative to terminaling operation will be transferred to Paria Fuel. All the assets of Petrotrin relative to the refinery operations will be transferred to Guaracara Refining. Some residual assets that are still owned by Trintoc and Trintopec at Pointe-à-Pierre will be transferred to Guaracara. And as the Minister in the Ministry of Finance explained, all the issued and outstanding shares in Heritage Petroleum, Paria Fuel, and Guaracara, and Petrotrin be legally and beneficially owned by the holding company, Trinidad Petroleum Holding Company, and then the shares of the Trinidad Petroleum Holding Company will be legally and beneficially owned by Corporation Sole, the Minister of Finance. That's the governance structure. But there are certain steps to continue. There's something called an exploration and production license, which is issued by the Minister of Energy under this very Petroleum Act that Senator Ramdeen is speaking about. The next phase in this process would be that the licenses that are currently owned by Petrotrin will have to be assigned to Heritage. And that assignment has to be approved and signed off by the Minister of Energy. I've already looked through it, and obviously I will do it. And as this bill is passed in this House, within a couple of days' time, the license will be assigned to Heritage. It's 20 exploration and production license blocks, 23 lease operatorship agreements, 8 farm-out agreements, 3 incremental production sharing contracts, 5 sub-licenses for lease operators, sub-license for 3 other incremental production sharing contracts, and several other sub-licenses. And I just want to share some further information. Heritage and what used to be Petroleum has some other strategic interests, you know, apart from land and Trinma that we speak about every day. Everybody, sometimes, plenty times I get up here and speak about Tikpu and Saman, which is handled by Perenco now, which was the old Amoco and BP fields. Petrotrin has 15% equity in Tikpu and Saman. Very few people in the country know that. And NCME Block 1, Block 9, which is an E&P license of the North Coast, producing gas, operated by Shell. Petrotrin has 19.5% equity in that. In Trentoma, Petrotrin has 16% equity in that. And in the SECC Reverse L Block, Petrotrin has 16% equity in that. There's a shallow water bid round that I launched last week, where 6 new state blocks will be going out in the international market for bidding. It will be highly competitive, and it's the intention of the state to assign 15% carried interest to a local entity on those blocks, and we are seriously contemplating whether those carried interests could be assigned to Heritage Petroleum. And this thing about Petrotrin shut down, this company will have more activity than Petrotrin.
Yeah.
The Southwest Peninsula, the very place
More agile.
my good friend Senator Obika claims to be campaigning for. He can't win, and he knows he will lose, but it is his right to campaign. Santa Flora, Palaseco, Faizabad. The Prime Minister said, and Senator West said it too, the Minister of Finance. Petrotrin was the only oil company in the world that oil prices were going up and they weren't drilling. It's the only company in the oil company in the world that wasn't looking for more oil. It's the only company in the world with high oil prices. They were not looking for oil. Senator Obika mentioned the price of oil high, we should be creeping in money. Buoyant, yes, that's the correct word. You cannot make money if you don't have production.
That's right.
And worse yet, Petrotrin still produces around 60% of the national oil production. And if they're not paying the state taxes, they owe in the state $3.4 billion.
That's right.
In supplemental petroleum tax, petroleum profit tax, and royalties. So here you in a state of buoyant oil prices. Half of the revenue you should be getting should be coming from Petrotrin. It is non-existent. Thank God for BP, for Shell, for EOG, for the other companies, that they continue to pay the taxes so they keep the exchequer afloat in moving on. So this new company now will focus on drilling, on workover, on seismic, on production operations, and it will be employing more people, the very engineers and production people that the goodly opposition senators keep clamoring for. We have good people in Trinidad, I know it. I've seen them. I've seen them work all over the world. And it's not a matter of firing. It's a matter of having an organization that is sustainable.
That's right.
Somebody has to pay your salary, you know. And the day they cannot cut the check when the mountain reaches, you have to confront the reality. And that is the long and short of the story. So before I wind up, how much more minutes?
Finish at 6:09.
6:09, oh yes. Oh, I'm going good still, yeah. So let me now deal with my good friend, Senator Ramdeen. Well, it's just a figure of speech. The Petroleum Regulations, Chapter 6201, Clause 42F, does in fact say under local content policy to minimize the employment of foreign personnel, ensure that such employees are engaged only in positions for which the operator cannot, after reasonable advertisement in at least one daily newspaper circulated in Trinidad, find available nationals of Trinidad and Tobago having the necessary qualification and experience. That's a very subjective position. And it can apply to all levels in the organization, from a pipe fitter to a production assistant, to an engineer, a petroleum engineer, a production superintendent, a manager, or a chief executive. And when you reach at the highest level of the international oil business, you have to be careful. Because that's where it strategically matters.
That's right.
And when we cannot tell, even though we have this regulation in our statute, we cannot tell BP, based on this regulation, that you have to employ a Trinidadian president. Okay? Because they run a global business. When they apply for work permits, you know what they tell us? And with some justification, I have a cadre of Trinidadians working for BP, assigned all over the world.
Yeah.
In Azerbaijan, in Qatar, in Russia, in the UK, in Alaska. Because we are a global company, and we are training our staff all over the world. So by the same token, you have to be facilitative, that we may have somebody from Azerbaijan who has to come and spend a 2-year in Trinidad as part of their overall development. And when we reach, as I said, to the boardroom level and to the highest executive position, there's something called, these companies are very sophisticated. They see you very early in your career and say you have leadership potential. And they have a program to start to train you for junior, mid-range, and senior, and possibly chief executive positions. They have a program worked out for you. And there's something intangible that they understand, and it's called leadership.
Yes.
Leadership in the organization. So John Brown from BP, a guy I call Bob Dudley now. So when you have leadership qualities, sometimes your CV can't reflect it, you know. It has to be known within the organization. And you have to have a very expert interview panel to pull it out of you. Because you are the person with the responsibility to take this organization forward. So while this exists in the statute, I think it was misquoted and misrepresented by the Honorable Senator Gerard Ramsey. And let me just go for the records. While $240,000 TT per month in the global energy market is not particularly lucrative.
That's what it is.
Trust me on that. It's a reality we have to face also. That is not particularly lucrative. It is competitive, but it is not lucrative. To lead an energy company with a vision to take it forward, to transform the local energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago, I think is a price well worth it. And we will continue to monitor his performance at the level of the board, at the level of the Cabinet Subcommittee on Energy, and we will monitor that situation very, very closely on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The issue of the incorporation of the subsidiaries. Mr. Espine and Mr. Ajura Singh were appointed directors for the purposes of incorporation. There's a full board of 13 people in Petrotrin. They were selected for incorporation. What the government is presently in the process of doing is reviewing the Petrotrin board, reviewing the requirements of the boards of the subsidiaries. We will be bringing in new people to staff the boards of the subsidiary in particular. We may be using some of the Petrotrin directors on the boards of the subsidiary, and we will staff the holding company board with people who are of that governance and corporate model to monitor the situation. There are challenges, because to find good people, it's not that there are not good people in Trinidad, you know, but there are very serious constraints on serving on board of directors of state companies. And I make no apologies to say the biggest one is, you know what? Through you, Mr. Vice President, the Integrity Commission.
Yeah, sure.
Minister, you have 5 minutes.
There are people in this country who said, I have worked all my life. I have built my career, and I have built my finances legitimately.
Yeah.
And I am not going to subject myself to some of the things that the Integrity in Public Life Act requires of me. That's an individual choice. It doesn't mean that if you don't want to subject yourself to that, you are corrupt. It is just a personal choice. And you have to respect the person for that. It's as simple as that. And that puts the state under tremendous pressure to find some of the type of people who are willing to serve on boards. The operations of heritage, and thus employment and economic activity to San Fernando, Marabella, and the Southwest Peninsula. We have, within reason, within the confines of the resources available to us, which in Petrotrin's case is quite substantial to some extent, worked on a very, while probably not lucrative, but a very generous package termination benefits for the workers. Quite a few of them, I should say, I don't want to say significant amount of them, or half of them, or three-quarters of them, would be reemployed through the heritage and, to some extent, Paria, and a small amount in Guaracara. We will be focusing a lot.
Would the member with the offending device step outside for 5 minutes and then return, please? Minister.
The people who have crossed 50 that are required, who immediately gets their pension and their lump sum, you know, we have to look at them through a different lens. My main concern as Minister of Energy, and with the overall responsibility for this exercise, is our young professionals. Because I know most of them are quite capable. I make no apologies as a UWI graduate myself, that UWI has one of the best undergraduate programs in the world.
That's all right.
Especially in engineering, in geology, in chemical, in law, and what have you. And there are a lot of young people with young families trying to build a career. But they also have to learn, too, that even the Japanese have now moved away from job for life. Long time, if you're a Japanese engineer and you start off with Sony, you're Sony until you're dead, because your father worked with Sony, or with Sony, or with Nissan, or with Toyota. Even in Japan, that is changing. So changing jobs is not something to be particularly scared about. In a limited economy like Trinidad and Tobago, there could be a challenge. I personally have changed many jobs in my life. I was a risk taker, and it worked out with me quite well in the end. I finally ended up in probably what is not the best job in the world. But I still enjoy it because I think it is public service. I love my country. I love my community where I grew up in Mayaro, and Senator Ameen say, I doesn't say or make any contribution in this parliament without mentioning Mayaro, but I make no apologies for that. It's a tongue that made me what I am, and I cherish the relationships I have there with my school friends, with my family, and with the people I grew up with. So, Mr. Vice President, I hope I have shed some light in what is a very complex matter. I attempted to simplify it for the audience of Trinidad and Tobago to understand the grave situation that we were in, the model we have used to extricate ourselves from this situation, and hope that this new corporate arrangement and the new structure for the oil sector in Trinidad and Tobago will be a tremendous fruit to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and we should have some happier times together in the oil sector. I thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hosein. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for allowing me the opportunity to join in this debate. Now, Mr. Vice President, it gives me no pleasure whatsoever to join in this debate, because what this Parliament is being asked to do this evening is to lay the final nail in the coffin of Petrotrin. The coffin was built downstairs, and they brought it upstairs now to complete that construction. And when this bill is passed in this Parliament, it will be the end of Petrotrin in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Vice President. This bill signifies the butchering, it signifies the slaughtering of Petrotrin, chopping up, dismantling, and destroying what was once a flagship company of our blessed country. This slaughtering will affect the lives of thousands of workers and their families. You are removing valuable assets from Petrotrin and leaving it with a legacy of debt. Throughout this entire restructuring exercise, or under the guise of restructuring, this government has acted illegally on every front. They have abused the laws, they have abused the workers, and they have abused the citizens of this country. They have completely disregarded the law, acted unlawfully, ultra-vires, and without any legal authority. And I expected the Minister of Energy, in his contribution, to properly address those issues that Senator Ramdeen would have raised, those issues that dealt with the enormous sums of monies that were paid to certain individuals with no benefit to this country. This is the minister who administers the Petroleum Act. This is the minister who has all of the information, but yet provided none to this parliament to answer the allegations by Senator Ramdeen. None whatsoever. So you know what that says, Mr. Vice President? It says whatever Senator Ramdeen has said has been accepted by the government.
Silence is consent.
And the Minister of Energy spoke of that the government is not shutting down Petrotrin. Well, I was amused when I heard that, because clearly this PNM government is governing somewhere on the moon or in Mars. Because you shut down the refinery, you send home all of the workers, but you're not shutting down Petrotrin. You're taking out all of the assets, but you're not shutting down Petrotrin. Not a single worker. Come to talk about Amazon and Google and Apple. You think workers want to hear that? They can't afford nothing in those companies. As the senior counsel in the matter that was recently decided yesterday, he said, you know what this government is doing, Mr. Vice President? They are mama-guying workers. Mama-guying workers. And then I heard, again, you are mama-guying people, because you said there will be so much activity on the Southlands that you will employ so much people. Well, the judgment said that they fired 5,500 individuals. And they set up all of these companies. So let's go through the companies and let's see how much people they're going to hire. The first company, Guaracara Refining Company. This is the company's document, Mr. Vice President, I'm reading from. Number of intended employees, 1. No, one. Uno. Next company, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited. Number of intended employees, 200. Next company, Heritage Petroleum Company. Number of intended employees, 800. You fire 5,500 workers, and then you're going to hire 1,100 workers? 1,001 worker? How could you say that? Are you fooling the people? You are mama-guying the workers, mama-guying the people. Then you come and tell the people, tell the country that a salary, then you come and tell the country.
Senator, it's getting a little loud. Allow the member to contribute so that I can hear him. Continue, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. And then you come to tell the country that receiving a salary of $250,000 per month is not lucrative. That is 5 times the salary of the Prime Minister. 5 times. You said it's not lucrative. But when workers in Petrotrin were making $25,000, $10,000, you vilify them. You come to the parliament and say, oh, look, they're working for so much money. We need to shut down the company. This wage bill is too high. But then you're hiring one man, for how much? $250,000. Imagine this. Imagine this government, the hypocrisy of this government, Mr. Vice President. And today I was reading the news there this morning. And there was a poll. And out of that poll, they wanted to get the public opinion on the shutdown of the refinery. 64% of the people said the refinery should not have been shut down. 23% said that it should have been shut down. And then they also polled a trust issue. And you know who scored the lowest in the trust issue? Wilfred Espini. So the population never voted for this man. They don't trust the man, but you appoint him on every single one of these new companies to run it. I call on this government that if you need to fire somebody, fire Wilfred Espini. That is the man you need to fire. But Mr. Vice President, let me get into the substance of my contribution. What this bill they're asking us to do in this vesting bill is to just take out assets from Petrotrin and put it into 3 other companies. The E&P assets into the Heritage Company, the refinery assets into the Guaracara Company, and then you have the marketing assets into the Paria company. Now, there was a similar exercise done in this country with many other state enterprises, Biwi, Caroni, TT Post. So you have to ask the question, Mr. Vice President, what is the purpose in doing this? Because when you take out all of these assets from these companies and place it in other companies, the Petrotrin debt remains the same. Petrotrin still has the same amount of debts. Where's the business model to show how by vesting these assets will equate to profitability? How? And then during my research, I went back to Hansard, and I saw the Attorney General, while he was an opposition senator, participated in a debate dealing with the TT Post vesting bill in 2012. And you know what the Attorney General had to say, Mr. Vice President, and I'll quote from the Hansard, dated the 6th of March, 2012. The Attorney General says, "What concerns me is, how are we going to move by a mere vesting of properties of TT Post into a position of profitability? We may very well be putting assets only into TT Post, same thing we're doing here, but we are not guaranteed without production of a business plan or any form of conscience as to how we are going to achieve profitability. I would think that is an important matter to put before the Senate." Now, myself and the Attorney General, we don't always agree. But in this case, I agree with him totally. Where is the business plan? Where is the business plan to show that the vesting of these assets is going to make Petrotrin profitable? You have presented nothing to the country. As I joined with Senator Vieira when he said there's a lack of information, a complete lack of information, there's no transparency, there's no accountability, and there's no document, there's no plan to show the governance structure of these new companies. Because the same fellas, the same persons who destroyed Petrotrin, well, they appoint them directors on these other 4 companies. Then I move on to the other point. The Attorney General raised a valuable point in that same debate. He said, we must know what the values of these assets are. So I asked the government, what are the values of these assets that we are going to vest from Petrotrin to Heritage, Paria, and Guaracara? These are billion-dollar assets. We don't know how much is going into these smaller companies, Mr. Vice President. We need to know what the values of the assets are. This is clearly a not well thought out plan, because as Senator Ramdeen would have raised the point too, that these companies were incorporated on the 5th of October, but then you have on the 7th of November a cabinet note saying that we're going to put all the assets into this company. So you create the company before cabinet approve it. That doesn't make sense, Mr. Vice President. It's a back-to-front government. And then you must look at the illegality of this government and how they acted illegally. And this vesting bill, there's a fundamental flaw in this vesting bill. And the government must acknowledge that they have messed up in this situation and they must fix the error, because they are acting illegally, Mr. Vice President. How can you transfer lands that you don't own? You can't do that. Any lawyer will tell you that is fraudulent. That is fraud. Whenever you are going to conduct any land transaction, a deed of conveyance, a transfer of title, what you will do is conduct a land search, a title search. And the title search will tell you, 1, whether or not you have good root of title, and 2, whether or not the chain of title is established. So that from the first owner to the current owner, there's a chain of ownership, so that you will be able to know that the present owner actually owns the land. So I want to go through the history of this part of the vesting, Mr. Vice President. And I'm focused on the second schedule of the bill that deals with vesting the ENP lands, the PSAEL lands, into the Heritage Petroleum Company. And in 1993, there was a Petrotrin Vesting Act that was passed. And in the first schedule of that act, it dealt with the core assets of Petrotrin. And some of those core assets, according to the first schedule of that act, are assets such as the oil mining leases and licenses, the producing and non-producing oil fields, the shares in Trinma, the Point-of-Pay and Point Fortin refineries, the Point-of-Pay hospital. So those are the first scheduled assets. And then they vested in non-core assets, which are the second scheduled assets. They left them in Trintoc and Trintopec. And these assets are the Point-of-Pay residential area buildings, the recreational clubs and facilities, the residences in Maraval, Beach Camp, Forest Reserve residential, and then more importantly, you have all agricultural holdings, which are the shares in Trintoc and PSAEL. So in 1993, these agricultural lands that this government now wants to vest into the Heritage Company was held by PSAEL. But interestingly, in 2015, by a ministerial order, which the Minister of Finance is empowered to do, he transferred the lands, that is the PSAEL lands, to Petrotrin. And this is the exact same land that is found in the second schedule of this bill.
What?
Exact same land. And the exact same land amounts to, I can give you the figures, it amounts to 1,829 acres of land located in Kura and Kori, and also 1,896 acres of land located in Palo Seco. Exact same lands, you know. Exact same lands that were transferred from PSAEL to Petrotrin 2015. Now the government says they want to transfer the lands from PSAEL to Heritage. Well, PSAEL don't own the land. It is Petrotrin that owns the land. How can you transfer lands that you don't own, Mr. Vice President? It is fraudulent, it is unlawful, and this bill should be withdrawn from this House. It is a shame for a government to bring such a fundamentally flawed piece of legislation for the deliberation of this Parliament. I have the legal notice in my hand that transferred the lands. And to top it off, there's a letter sent by the Ministry of Finance and the Economy to the chairman of PSAEL at that time, indicating that the 2015 order was drafted and it was going to be gazetted. I have the letter in my hand. So they cannot come and say that they are unaware. The records for them, the record shows that the lands has been transferred. The ministerial order, it was gazetted. It was gazetted on the 12th of February 2015. I cannot understand how the government could have missed this. How could they make such a fundamental flaw? And I'm thankful to my colleague, Senator Ramdeen, because we work as one in the side. We don't share information with other people on the other side. And, but Senator Ramdeen, he passed me the cabinet note that one of their colleagues would have passed to them, the 7th of November 2018.
Examine the whole.
And I examined this cabinet note, every single page, Mr. Vice President. Not a single mention. Not a single mention of the 2015 ministerial order that transferred the lands from PSAEL to Petrotrin. But then you hear, I listened to the debate, Mr. Vice President. I listened to the debate in the other place. I listened to the debate in the other place. And in the other place, I heard the Minister of Finance saying, he say, the order, that 2015 order is null and void, null and void. Well, respectfully, Minister of Finance, if it's null and void, you have the power to revoke it. And I don't know since when you had the power to determine whether or not a statutory instrument is null and void. You have executive power, not judicial power, Minister of Finance. And then when you look again, there's a legal, I would ask the Minister of Finance to show me the legal opinion that pointed him to say that the order was null and void. And if his argument that the 2015 order is null and void, well then, everything that was done under that order is also illegal and null and void. So he has to come clean with the population and say whether or not he's going to withdraw, revoke the 2015 order, or whether he's going to amend the current bill. This is going to clearly lead into terminal legal issues, Mr. Vice President. Then you see, even before this bill is passed in this House, I don't know, the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries is having a very difficult time, Because even before the bill is passed, I have in my hand a letter, a pre-action protocol letter, from one Peter A.C. Taylor, attorney at law. I believe he was a former PNM minister, MP, Minister of Legal Affairs, and cabinet colleague of my friends opposite. And the letter, 15th November 2018, yes, they know him very well, addressed to the Honorable Franklin Card, Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. And what he's basically alleging in this letter, Mr. Vice President, is, if I'm going to break it down in layman's terms, is that Petrotrin trying to take his client's land. That is basically what it is. You are taking away people's land. Sort out the land issues in Petrotrin. Stop this illegality. Come clean with the population. Do the work before you come with a vesting bill in order to vest all of these assets. What this government is doing is going to pass heavy litigation onto the Heritage Petroleum Company. That is what they're going to do. But I guess the Minister of Energy and former Minister Peter Taylor will have their days in court, however long that may be, Mr. Vice President. And there's another point, Mr. Vice President, that I would like to raise. And this is also a point relating to the lands. And the point is that Petrotrin has no evidence of all the lands it owns, all the lands that it owns. Because when the lands were transferred, I'll give a background into this point also. When the lands were transferred in 1993 by the Petrotrin Vesting Act of 1993, those lands were formerly owned by Trintoc and Trintopec. Now, at that time, the Petrotrin board was uncertain as to whether or not this act was sufficient to have vested all of these lands into Petrotrin. That is the Trintopec lands into Petrotrin. And Mr. Vice President, they sought a legal opinion. And this legal opinion was done by one Hedwige Barrow, attorney at law, who holds himself out to be a specialist in petroleum law, a former PNM MP, and also I believe that he was awarded. He was an awardee. He was an awardee at the Sunday Convention in Tobago. And this is what their own colleagues, advised them of, you know. Their colleagues advised them, yes, the Petrotrin Act was good enough to vest the lands. But you know what he also advised them? He said, Petrotrin needs to identify every single parcel of land it owns.
They even listen to Barrow?
They might listen to Barrow. They have to do something called deeds of affirmation. You must affirm the title on Petrotrin lands. Now, there are two systems of land in Trinidad. You have the common law system, and then you have the RPO land system. With the common law system, you do deeds of affirmation saying that Petrotrin would, the lands were vested in Petrotrin by virtue of the act. And it's some recitals that you include in the deed. I have a copy of one of those deeds in my hand. DE 2006-0178-1126. That is the number of the deed as an example of one of the deeds of affirmation. But he also indicated that with respect to the RPO lands, when you transfer RPO lands, you have to endorse the back of those certificates with a stamp, and you would fill out the information where the lands are transferred or affirmed to. Now, none of this was done, Mr. Vice President. And their own colleague, Mr. Barrow, warned them that you need to do this. So Petrotrin had 25 years to complete this exercise. 25 years to complete this exercise. And do you want to know what is the status of that exercise, Mr. Vice President? There are currently 853 parcels of land, amounting to 13,863 acres of land, yet to be affirmed by Petrotrin. But then when you look at the status or the state of the Petrotrin land management system, you will find the following. You will find that Petrotrin cannot account for 216 parcels of land, that over 439 RPO deeds are missing from Petrotrin. Missing, you know, Mr. Vice President. This is from Petrotrin. 439 RPO titles are missing. Imagine they have 148 parcels of land, non-contiguous parcels of land, which means land all over the place, not in one location. And you know what, Mr. Vice President? They put it under one assessment number. One assessment number. That is the state of Petrotrin lands today. And you know what this government is going to do? They're going to pick up all the land and place it in the heritage company. You failed to sort out the issues with respect to the land ownership and land regularization of Petrotrin. And now you are going to put it into this heritage company. Petrotrin will not be able to account for the lands it owns. You did not do the work. The government failed to do the work. It is a laziness on the part of this PNM government to do the work, Mr. Vice President. It's a laziness. Right? They were there for 5 years. Don't worry. I'm coming to that. No, I'm coming to that. Since I'm coming to that. And Mr. Vice President, the government is landing itself in a messy situation with regards to the lands of Petrotrin. And the Minister of Energy did allude that the Heritage Petroleum Company will be the profitable company, the exploration and production part of the Petrotrin side. And if you are going to transfer all of these issues to this company, they will be bogged down in legal litigation. You are going to open up floodgates of litigation. So, Mr. Vice President, this is a warning to the government. Fix this piece of legislation. Fix it. But then, Senator Ramdeen would have alluded to this point earlier, that yesterday at the industrial court, just yesterday, a judgment was handed down. A judgment was handed down saying that Petrotrin committed an industrial relations offense. An industrial relations offense.
And they get fined.
They get fined $4,000. It should have been more, but that's the maximum fine. And in this judgment, Mr. Vice President, you would see that a list of witnesses were given. And the Attorney General in this matter, we need to understand this matter. Let's rewind a little bit. This matter ended up before the court simply because the Minister of Labor and Minister of Labor would have entered into the industrial court a memorandum of agreement between the union and Petrotrin, which would have had the same power as a court order. Then, before Petrotrin decided to close the company, they failed to consult with the union. And that is what brought this matter to the court. Failed to consult with the union. In the words of Wilfred Espine, he didn't need to because it didn't make sense to consult with the union because they're going to shut down the company. The Attorney General wanted to be an interested party in this judgment, in this matter, Mr. Vice President. He went to the court refused him, he went to the Court of Appeal, they gave him leave to come down and appear in the matter. So he decided to call 2 witnesses. One, Timmy Baksh, Director of Energy, witness for the Attorney General, and one, Vishnu Danpal, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, witness for the Attorney General. And the court obviously had to test the testimony of Mr. Danpal. So the court, at page 9 of the judgment, they said, and if you allow me to quote Mr. Vice President, because I don't want to misquote the court, they said, Mr. Danpal, in his witness statement, stated inter alia, the calls for government guarantees are happening with greater frequency as more delay and instability occurs, and this increased even more when the interim injunctive relief was granted by the court. Mr. Danpal offered to produce letters to the court in support of his contention. He produced emails with respective attachments dated 24 October, 1st November, 2nd November, 9th November 2018. And this is what the court said. The court said, however, none of these emails made mention of court proceedings or to injunctive relief, which was granted on the 8th of October 2018. Moreover, there is no email which contained a request for a government guarantee as a result of court proceedings. This man is a witness for the Attorney General and being untruthful to the court, Mr. Vice President. the court found that what he was saying in his witness statement is not what was adding up in the documents that was produced to the court. And then this government wants us to trust them whenever they say that Petrotrin cannot be profitable. Under UNC government, Mr. Vice President, let me put this on the record, we would have never shut down Petrotrin. We would have never shut down Petrotrin. We would have always stayed on the side of workers in this country, Mr. Vice President, because we are a very inclusive party, and our track record in government would have shown that we cared about the people of this country, Mr. Vice President. We would have never employed, Mr. Vice President, a foreigner to head our heritage company. A heritage company, the first employee is a foreigner. That is the hypocrisy of this government. That is the hypocrisy of this government. And Mr. Vice President, as I move along, because there's much to be said with regards to this matter, because on all legs we are seeing that the lands that are going to be vested in the heritage company, illegal, fraudulent. We see that the manner in which Petrotrin closed down the refinery, again, illegal. The court found them to be illegal. The hiring of Wiley, illegal again, Mr. Vice President.
The election of the PNM.
I wouldn't go there. But Mr. Vice President, it shows that this entire debacle, this entire shutting down of Petrotrin, the entire way in which the PNM government dealt with Petrotrin was illegal, unlawful. But we have to go on to show that the governance structure of this new arrangement is, there's none. Because the Minister of Energy, he held up a flowchart showing how Petrotrin would have reached to the state that it was in terms of Trintoc, Trintopec, Trinma, all being amalgamated under one umbrella called Petrotrin. So that was then 3 companies forming one. And you know what this government did, Mr. Vice President? They moved backwards. They take one company and split it into 4. That's what they do, you know. So history is repeating itself. That is what this government has done. If it didn't work then, you think it will work now? You still have the same man heading all of the boards. Mr. Wilfred Espine, Mr. Renola Jodasingh.
Yeah, 4 ladies now.
Right? And Mr. Vice President, I go along again. Let us examine the documents, the company's documents that would have established or incorporated all of these companies. The Minister of Energy spoke of persons who were not coming forward because they are afraid, they don't want to make their declarations under the Integrity in Public Life Act. And I found that very alarming, because the only reason that you'll be afraid to declare assets under that act is that if you probably would have acquired your assets unlawfully, if you have something to hide, if you have cocoa in the sun. And Mr. Vice President, you'll get your time to speak. And Mr. Vice President, when you look at the way in which these companies are set up, I want to draw an example with respect to TSTT. The Court of Appeal would have found that TSTT was not a state enterprise because of the arrangement of the shareholding. And you know what, Mr. Vice President? The directors of TSTT are not subjected to the provisions of the Integrity in Public Life Act because it's not controlled by the state. And when you look at these companies' documents, you will see a section, and that section is Section 5 of every company's document: Heritage, Paria, and Guaracara. Restrictions, if any, on share transfers or share ownership. You know what the answer is? None. No restriction. Nothing prevents any of these companies from divesting the shares into private persons, Mr. Vice President. If this happens, you privatize these companies, and you know what? None of them will be subject to the Integrity in Public Life Act. I don't know if that is what this government wants, but I think these incorporation documents need to be amended so that the government gives a commitment that the shares remain in the state and it is not to be privatized. And these companies' documents are very telling, Mr. Vice President, because there's another part, and it deals with Part 7 of the incorporation documents. Restrictions, if any, on powers of directors to amend bylaws. None. That's the answer, none. All of these companies, no restrictions. Now, the bylaws of a company, Mr. Vice President, those will be the provisions. Those will be the laws. It will be the constitution that governs these companies. We have seen none. Not a single bylaw was created. And we don't know what will be incorporated into them. We are going to lose the governance structure. The state may very well lose control of these companies, Mr. Vice President. Why didn't the state put any restrictions in terms of the creation of bylaws? Allow these bylaws to be subject to the scrutiny of the parliament so that the people will know how these 4 companies are going to be governed. You fail to do it yourselves privately, so bring it to the public. Let us determine how these companies are going to be run, Mr. Vice President. And that is the secrecy that this government is involved in. Everything they do is in a shroud of secrecy, everything that they do. Because there's another company, it's called the Trinidad and Tobago Upstream Downstream Company Limited. I remember when this company was incorporated, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Energy again, he said, we signed a gas deal with Nikwan to provide gas, and we will use some of Petrotrin assets and invest it into this Trinidad Upstream Downstream Company. Well, aren't you going to invest any of these assets into the company? Is that plan aborted? Did you retract from that plan? Did you withdraw from that position? Because it was in a press release by the Minister of Energy. What happened from now till then? From then till now, Mr. Vice President, it leaves so many questions unanswered with regards to this deal. It leads us to only one conclusion, that we have to question every move by this government because we simply cannot trust them. When you have witnesses on behalf of the government going into the court and being strangers to the truth, what do you expect, Mr. Vice President? We cannot trust this government. But in the cabinet note that my colleague would have passed to me also, they took out all of the assets from Petrotrin, exploration and production, refining, the refinery, sorry, marketing and marketing. But there are a few assets that are remaining, Mr. Vice President, and these assets are still in the name of Trintoc and Trintopec, and these are the bungalows, right, Mr. Vice President? In the November 7th cabinet note, Mr. Vice President, they dealt with those bungalows. So you shut down Petrotrin, you fire all the workers, you move out all the assets from Petrotrin, and you know what you're doing by this cabinet note? What you're going to call the Petrotrin Vesting Order 2018? Taking all the bungalows, all the nice houses that Petrotrin own, and you're going to put it in Petrotrin where you have no employees. Who are going to be the ones benefiting from these bungalows, Mr. Vice President?
$1 billion.
Who are they? Now, I remember a colleague from the other side was in court because she didn't want to leave the bungalow. But then it was so nice. It was so nice she didn't want to leave, Mr. Vice President. I'm not going to call any names. I'm not going to call any names. I'm not calling names, Mr. Vice President. I wouldn't be involved in that type of activity. But they will have experienced the luxuries of those bungalows that they had to end up on the steps of the court to remain. But then they had to be evicted, Mr. Vice President.
She has good teeth.
So, Mr. Vice President, we are asking these pertinent questions because you know what these are? These are the goodies that Petrotrin own, the goodies of the state.
I see.
And there is no policy of how these goodies will be distributed. We don't know who are going to get them, Mr. Vice President. And these are pertinent questions. I don't know if Mr. Wiley is already in one, cozying himself in one. But I know that Petrotrin has been shut down. This is the first time in the history of probably any part of the world that you shut down a company and you decide to renovate it at the same time. Because I'm reliably informed.
So you have 5 minutes.
I'm reliably informed, Mr. Vice President, that right now Petrotrin is undergoing some beautification exercises, that there's some painting going on at the compound there in Pointe-à-Pierre, Mr. Vice President. And the government really needs to rethink what they are doing with respect to this Petrotrin issue. Because you must always learn from the history. And the population must be able to be aware, and they must be able to comprehend where the PNM government has put us. Because we must understand why did we come here today? Why it is that Petrotrin is at this state today. And in the words of the Honorable Prime Minister, he said it was as a result of incomplete engineering at the start of omissions, technical issues. And you know what? You know what? He said it dealt with the cost overruns of this project. And I'll just give a few, Mr. Vice President. World GTL, 3.15 billion. Gasoline optimization program increased from 2.45 billion in 2005 to 12.6 billion, which was completed in 2013. Ultra low sulfur diesel project rose from 791 million to 2.89 billion. The abandoned new headquarters, which cost the citizens of this country more than $400 million. A sharp decline in Trinmar's production by 1/3, from 33,597 barrels per day in 2005 to 22,389 barrels per day in 2010. And they always complain about the bonds, but they must admit that it was under a PNM government that those bonds were issued to Petrotrin. You have locked the neck of the government, of Petrotrin. You have locked the neck of the economy in this country. And right now, what you are doing is that you are going to bury Petrotrin. Petrotrin is the victim of the PNM. The PNM has battered, the PNM has destroyed, and now they are dismantling what was one of our most proud state enterprise in this country, Petrotrin. And I thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Teemal.
Mr. Vice President, first of all, my thanks for the opportunity to contribute to this miscellaneous provisions, Heritage Petroleum, Paria, Fuel Trading, Guaracara Refining Vesting Bill 2018. But before I do so, I must express my appreciation to the government senators and also opposition senators for their warm welcome and best wishes to this House. No matter what we discuss about divestment, Mr. Vice President, with all the talk and all noble intentions, we know that divestment of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago subject to a lot of challenges, and it is not something that is going to happen even in the short term in any significant way to shift the basis of our economy. And no matter what, despite the optimism expressed by Senator Franklin Kahn about the model gas that is evolving and the expected revenues and benefits to the economy, there is no doubt that for a significant amount of years to come, what happens coming out of this restructuring of Petrotrin is going to impact significantly on our economy, a significant period of time. Senator Vieira, in his contribution, mentioned about a general lack of information. And I would like to echo his view as well, to some extent, in that a preamble to a bill, in my humble opinion, should really lay the groundwork and should really contain detailed information to remove any suspicions about a bill that is being proposed. And unfortunately, in my opinion, the preamble to this bill and the information and the way that is presented is creating a lot of doubts, at least in my mind. In that, for instance, other than the mention of Petrotrin, the fact that it's a company registered under the Companies Act, Chapter 1810, when it comes to mention of Heritage Petroleum, the preamble simply states a company incorporated in Trinidad and Tobago. And it may seem that I am being nitpicking about very small things. But in terms of the base information in the preamble, it opens up the door for a lot of questions, I think. And there's no mention to say, like for instance, in the Caroni 1975 Limited and Orange Grove National Limited Divestment Act, in that preamble, when the company was being mentioned, it was very clear. Incorporated in Trinidad and Tobago, registered under the Companies Act, Chapter 1810, and most importantly, wholly owned state enterprise. And for all of the three companies here, Heritage Petroleum, Paria Fuel Trading, Guaracara Refining, in the preamble, that wholly owned state enterprise, for some reason, is not there. Additionally, and to me it's surprising, is that no mention is made in the preamble, although we have been told many times, that these are subsidiary companies of intended Trinidad Holding Petroleum Limited. Nowhere is this Trinidad Holdings Petroleum Limited is mentioned as well. Mr. Vice President, last night, looking at some of the CNC3 news, there was this part about the demolition of some homes, some foundations in the Santa Flora area. And I searched afterwards, looking at that news, the content of the bill, to see, in terms of the large area of land being transferred under this act, almost over 2,500 acres of land, whether there was mention of any land act that would impact on this proposed bill. For instance, the State Lands Act, the Agricultural Smallholdings Tenure Act, the Land Tenant Security of Tenure Act, the State Land Regularization of Tenure Act. And we need to be extremely careful with this piece of legislation that this act, this bill, should not operate to derogate from any rights, benefits, legitimate expectations already acquired by or vested in any tenant or squatter under the above acts. Mr. Vice President, in the preamble, the minister in the Ministry of Finance is mentioned. But you know, within the entire act, within the entire bill, there are no powers, no duties, no responsibilities, no mention of even the minister within the content of the bill. Not anywhere else in the bill is mentioned. And this act deals specifically with the transfer of assets of one state enterprise to another state enterprise. And there is no precedence, there is no definitive bill or act for the transfer of assets of state clearly to assets of another state. And this is why, in terms of the role of the minister, there are not any clauses at all mentioned definitively in this bill. Also, Mr. Vice President, it is a very well-known fact that when it comes to management of assets in this country, most of our state enterprises, if not all, are sadly inefficient. And I would like to propose that an asset management accountability framework should be presented to this Parliament no later than 3 months after the appointed day of December 1st, 2018 of this bill. The reason I'm saying that an asset management accountability framework should be presented, Mr. Vice President, is that all the non-current asset portfolios, including land, buildings, infrastructure, plant, and equipment, have and must be managed appropriately in order for this restructuring of Petroleum to work. Because, as I mentioned before, asset management is a serious challenge in this country, particularly by state enterprises. We need to manage assets in a manner consistent with state and government requirements, their own operational circumstances, and the nature and type of the asset base. And in this situation, the nature and the type of the asset base is very challenging because of the length of time that has elapsed, the length of time that Petroleum has been in operation, the intricacies of all the land leases, both freehold and leasehold lands, the aged buildings, the aged infrastructure, plant and equipment, makes it even more necessary. This asset management accountability framework should also be done to ensure full value from the assets in fulfilling their service delivery objectives. So I repeat again, consideration should definitely be given to having this asset management accountability framework presented within a specified time frame from the appointment of this bill to this House. And I will take some time just to enumerate some of the guiding principles for this asset management accountability framework. Firstly, it should be service delivery focused. It should focus on management activities, methods and decisions based on service delivery needs and outcome. So it needs to be driven by the service delivery needs of the three companies that the assets are being transferred to. It needs to be integrated into planning framework, in that asset planning and management to be integrated into government and state policy and planning framework in a meaningful and sustainable way. It must have a whole of life cycle approach, taking into account all costs incurred throughout the life cycle, from acquisition through transfer to disposal. Guiding principles should also be informed decision-making, evaluation of all potential methods to meet service delivery demands, meaningful performance measurement of assets through key performance indicators. Another guiding principle, responsible and accountable, responsibility and accountability. relevant ownership, control, accountability, responsibility, and reporting requirements for the transferred assets must be established and implemented. Asset management information systems should be maintained that meets the requirements for organizational and government information, decision-making, and reporting. Asset-related risks are fully integrated into the company's overall risk management framework. And lastly, guiding principle, maintenance and security. We all know our history of the lack of maintenance, in fact, the pervasive lack of maintenance culture that exists in our country, and security. Mr. Vice President, the refinery is being mothballed in the interest of inviting RFPs from potential operators at some point in time in the future who may make use of the refinery assets, put it back into production in a profitable manner. But mothballing the refinery, if we do not put security arrangements in place, we are familiar with what happened with Caroni 1975 Limited and its assets, and the looting, and the thieving, and the deterioration of those assets, so much so that rather than being an asset, they became a burden to the country. So the security, as part of the asset management accountability framework, to ensure that the theft and the vandalism of the mothball refinery is a very important aspect of a management framework that, in my opinion, needs to be put in place. Mr. Vice President, I would conclude here with just those few comments. But today, I understand, is the International Children's Day, United Nations. And the assets that are being transferred to these three companies must be managed effectively for the benefit of this country. And the children, as this is International Children's Day, for the benefit of our children and our future generations. I thank you.
Senator Ameen.
Sorry. Yeah.
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you. Can I congratulate all of you who have entered this honored place to serve the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and especially you, Senator Teemal, who have spoken for the first time here. And so convincingly. And I thank you for your contribution. And you have raised some points that perhaps we will consider. So thank you very much. So that, Mr. Vice President, the bill today was debated and passed in the lower house on Wednesday, the 14th of November. And it's an act. It's quite straightforward, contrary to what Senator Hosein will make it out to be. Quite straightforward. It's an act to vest certain assets of Petrotrin in the Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, the Paria Trading Company Limited, and the Guaracara Refining Company Limited. It also makes provisions to vest certain residual assets of Trintoc and Trintopec, the Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited, and the Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited, in the Guaracara Refining Company Limited as well. Also, the bill seeks to vest Palo Seco Agricultural Enterprises Limited lands into the Heritage Petroleum Company as well. And I think the Minister and the Minister of Finance would have detailed the further provisions of the bill. As I said, it's very straightforward, and I don't know that there's a need for me to actually detail these. So I'm just going to respond and try to elucidate on some of the comments that were made before. There was a comment made by Senator Ramdeen and echoed again by Senator Hosein. Not a comment, really, an assertion that there's this. There's these few pages of paper circulated on the opposition bench, which they purport to be a cabinet note, which they say, I'm on my feet, which they say was leaked by one of my colleagues. And I want to completely debunk that. And to say to you that those remarks are utterly false, and I will not allow you to debase any of my colleagues on this bench, in the cabinet, the 23 members of us in the cabinet, the Prime Minister.
Allow the minister to make a contribution without the shouting across the floor at her while she's trying to make that contribution. She is responding to comments that have gone before in this debate, and she's allowed to do so. Minister, continue.
Again, completely false, completely untrue, and your remarks are outrageous, and I'm extremely disappointed in you. I find it to be scandalous. I'm not surprised. I'll speak to you. The other points, a lot of the points that were raised by the other side, Mr. Vice President, really shows that the opposition in particular do not really understand the energy business. And it's a difficult business to understand in that the key point is it's a global business. As nationalistic as we want to be, this is a very, very complex global business. And I myself had to take the time to research and understand what we are talking about here. And as we went along making the decisions, bringing us to where we are today, we all were called upon to research and understand what's going on in the global oil business. So that I would speak to some of the things that that were not spoken to by the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. But before going much deeper into my commentary, I really want to commend. We got here on account of one person, and that is our Honourable Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley. Because I'll tell you why. This was a very, very difficult decision to take. We are extremely concerned for all those persons who were so unfortunate and had to walk away from their jobs. Many of them would have reapplied and would be reemployed. But there are those who will not be, because we understand the numbers. But yet, the point I make is that this was a difficult decision. And from the time we came into office, Dr. Rowley made the point of communicating with the population about Petrotrin and the dire state in which it was. He communicated, he also led, he got involved in international discussions, and we knew about all of his, we are aware of all of his interventions with all of these the state players, the international players, international stakeholders in the industry. And more than ever, he reactivated the Standing Committee on Energy, which we knew on that side didn't even exist in the first 2 years after they went into office. From 2010 to 2012, there was no Standing Committee on Energy. Thereafter, there were 17 meetings, I understand, but not one chaired by the then Honourable Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar. And that gives you an indication of their level of interest in what is the most important asset of Trinidad and Tobago, our energy assets, and which contributes greatly to our GDP, and which will, we could talk From here, we can talk from here till the cows come home, which will always have an impact, a serious impact, and be always relevant to the bottom line. So, again, I commend the Prime Minister for his leadership and for taking the decision on leading us, not taking the decision, but taking the decision to take charge of this unfavorable state of affairs at Petrotrin and to do something about it. We congratulate the board, Mr. Wilfred Espinay, and all of the other professionals who have come forward to serve. We congratulate them all because this is a mammoth task, mammoth, and to date we have done well. And of course, the discourse from the Honourable Minister of Energy would have sold that to the members of the public. But again, I'm not going to go back too far, but to say what we were saddled with were enormous debt, losses year on end, failed asset integrity, which continued to deteriorate. We remember, of course, we remember all of these oil spills, especially the one which affected the people of Le Bray, affected animal life, plant life. It's very, 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 very massive oil spill. So all of these assets we were concerned about, and really there was no end of the tunnel, no light at the end of the tunnel in the current business formation that Petrotrin was in. So again, a decision had to be taken, and I know that decision would definitely not come from the other side. They were there for 5 years. The prevailing circumstances were the same circumstances of the day, and yes, but you know, they have no gumption, they have no backbone, and they would never have known to have been able to take the difficult decisions that needed to be taken in the interests of our country. But that is what leadership is about. And you can't beat the Honourable Prime Minister, Keith Christopher Rowley. And it's the reason, why they will always remain on the other side. So again, the debt being... I don't need them to pound any desk. I'm quite comfortable. I'm speaking to the public. Yeah? And I want no bungalow because I'll have you know. No. I'll take an aside here and let Mr. Ramdeen know, Senator Ramdeen know, that I lived in the very bungalow next to it. So it meant nothing to me at all. It was due to me as a member of Parliament to Point Fortin. But it is not something that I'm unaccustomed to. In very event, you're thinking along those lines. Not at all. So we were talking about debt and the debt situation. And just to recall again, that that there were continuous losses of about $8 billion in the last 5 years. Petrotrin had amounted a debt to the tune of $12 billion. They had owed, what the minister said, $3.4 billion to the shareholders, to the citizens of this country in the form of taxes and royalty. It would have taken some $25 billion to keep Petrotrin alive if we had chosen to keep that refinery. And of course, we were expecting continuing losses of $2 billion annually. The operating costs were substantial, and the point was made that by, I think it was Mr. Espinay himself, the chairman, that the operating costs were about 70% higher than that of its closest competitors. And you have to understand that Petrotrin is a business like any other thing. Whether you're in the business of pharmacy or whether you're in the business of manufacturing, business it is a business, and there must be a business model that ensures that the activity is a sustainable one. Petrotrin is not a make-work program. It is just not about keeping workers. It's unfortunate that some persons lost their jobs. But Petrotrin is a viable business, and there was an intention in Petrotrin, there was an objective in Petrotrin, which was to contribute to the national pie and to bring benefits to the people of this country. So I looked at I had a cursory glance at the last balance sheet, and I looked at the operating results. I examined it. We were going nowhere. There was nothing to come out of this. There were some benefits. From the time we instituted the new executive team, and together with the strategies which they had put in place, I mean, there were noticeable results in reducing costs and cutting waste, but it still couldn't help us. And if you look at the current assets and the current liabilities, current assets of $7 billion, but in no way could meet the current liabilities of $13 billion. So that was an untenable situation. Untenable operating costs as well. Improvements, yes, from the time the new board came into place, but not enough to keep Petrotrin alive, especially recalling the bullet payments that were ahead of us, the $850 million US and the $750 million US in 2021. Again, and also, beyond the debt situation, the position with meeting our international environmental standards, which we know, and I will speak about it later, would be changing effective 2020. So here we are with the reinvention of Petrotrin. It is a refinery, and all of us will make the point, it is a refinery that has been shut down, and Petrotrin has been put into there are several subsidiary companies that have been created. The Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, involved in crude oil production and marketing. Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, involved in refined products trading and terminal operations. Guaracara Refinery Company with the refinery assets. The Petrotrin Legacy Company with the residual and the ongoing items. And the umbrella company, Trinidad Petroleum Holding Company Limited. Where are we with the transition? How has the transition been going? And I think the public ought to be assured that there has been a seamless transition in terms of supply. And when we look at some of the items that Petrotrin previously produced, gas oil, jet fuel, Mogas 95, Mogas 92, I looked actually at the ex-refinery stock to see when it would end, and I looked at each of these items and at the arrival of the first set of imports, and I can tell you that there was a suitable overlap in terms of supply days, and therefore this is the reason why the public has not at all suffered in terms of this transition. It has been a seamless transition thus far in terms of the supply of these products, gas oil, jet fuel, Mogas 95, Mogas, and you have to congratulate the transition team for the work that they have done. There's some key successes in that there's been the safe shutdown of the refinery operations. The last imported crude discharge was October 10, 2018, and crude processing ceased October 19, 2018. And again, we had, it was spoken of on this bench again, we had the export of local crude again, the first cargo left here already, and then of course we've had the import of refined products. So that we're on our way in terms of the transition process, and we can only look forward. We look forward to this new and refined group of companies, which at the end of the day, we want to be an asset that we will be very proud of, a national asset that is owned by the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I said before in my introduction that it was very clear that the members on the opposition did not understand that this is international business. And the Minister of Energy took the time, Energy and Energy Industries took the time to explain the international implications and so on. And I too looked at this, I went into a little bit of research, and there's a marvelous article called Refining 2021, Who Will Be in the Game? And it's by A.T. Kearney, and they are a global transformation group, and they've been in existence for a long time, since 1926, so they're quite strong. The article was published in June 2012, and it speaks about who will be in the game of this changing global market of the refinery business. And it really supports the decision which was taken by our cabinet and the board and so on. And published back then in 2012, this is what they said, that 1 in 5 oil refineries was expected to cease operations back then in 2012, 1 in 5 refineries. And that over the next 10 years, operators at 1 in every 3 refineries in North America and Western Europe will need to reconsider their operating models. So even if you didn't have to cease operations, you definitely had to go in and look at your operating models and how they integrated across the value chain. Otherwise, the article goes on to speak, they will struggle to keep up with changing global markets and to compete with the improving global standards in refining. And by 2021, refineries will need to restructure, strategically reposition their assets, or leave the market. And that is the reality of the refining business internationally. And I'll tell you, when they speak of improving global standards, I would speak a little bit about that. And we're talking about the IMO's, the International Maritime Organization's global sulfur cap, and what it means for the refining business. So that the current trend, then, of refinery closing is that it would continue. But refineries not taking a decision, being squeezed out of the market over the next 5 years, and especially for those with assets that are not financially viable. And they're speaking directly here to our situation in Petroleum. The debt situation, it was mammoth, huge. And so for those that are not financially viable, regardless of the model, you could choose whatever model you want, a decision about whether to exist had to be taken very early on, because there would absolutely be no hope for companies, refineries already in distress. The article spoke to refinery margins, and the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industry spoke to refinery margins dropping and so on. And as a result, more than half of the refineries in Asia, in the Middle East, and Eastern Europe have been constructed or significantly upgraded in the past decade to cope with the expectations to come. You see, they talk about some of the a significant amount of upgrade occurred in Asia and the Middle East and Eastern Europe. And I think somewhere in there is a reason why, and indeed, I think very early on, I think it was in the Basdev Pandey term of office, we had the first upgrade. I hope I'm right. And there was a second upgrade. And I think all of this was contemplated for the proper reasons, for the correct reasons. But there are all sorts of circumstances, including price, our own production levels, and so on. And all of those issues, the debt, the external prices, all of those circumstances would have accelerated our decision. But as I say, I think the refinery upgrade was well contemplated. The issue would have been the considerable cost overruns and the delays, and I know they wish to lay that at the feet of the blame at the feet of only the People's National Movement, subsequent governments, but that's not so at all, because we all know what happened with the UNSD plant under the last government, which Khalid Hassan Ali, the then president, said he would take that on to be his baby. But 5 years, strictly cost overruns, and at the end of the day, the UNSD project has come to naught. even with their involvement. So what we have done, and what is suggested, that you look into your asset portfolios and you see what makes sense, what is of value, and that's exactly what we did. What makes sense, what's of value, and separated into the exploration and production business, which will be intensified, and then, of course, the terminal in business, which in which there's revenue to be gained. Again, look at your assets, see what creates value, change your business model, and ensure that you capture the most value that you can from these from your asset portfolio. So that's where we are. And of course, it went on to speak about the refinery value drivers. I'm not going to go into all of that, but essentially it pointed to the things that matter: scale, technology, the assets which you have, your fiscal and regulatory regime, supply chain management, your operational flexibility. All of those considerations would be important in examining your current business model and paying attention as to where you go. So I think essentially the decision that we took in terms of the model of restructuring and so on, I think it was a very healthy a decision by all of those involved. And of course, we leaned also on the work of the Lashley report. We leaned on the McKinsey report. We leaned on the Solomon report as well. You know, so Petrotrin, to us, we will feel as we own it. So it will seem to us like a great national asset, but really it was of very little value to us. And the debt situation was truly untenable. The poor refining margins, the inadequate raw materials base. In the face of all of the changes in the global industry, there's just no way that we could have continued how we were. And again, we were not the only ones. Even the smaller refineries have been closed. Some of them have been converted to terminals, all in Western Europe. And I can give you examples of refineries, smaller refineries that have been converted to terminals in Western Europe, in France, in Italy, and Harburg by Shell in Germany, Conoco and there are others that have been offered for sale. Some Humberside by Conoco in the UK, Chevron in Refco in the Netherlands. So all over the world, small and large, you were affected, and it was incumbent on the government to really take all this into account. Clearly, there's no one size that fits all of these refinery types and oil operations. But again, what's important is to recognize and to have recognized that it was a time for change. Change had come, and we needed to do the right thing. And I'm very pleased that we do it. And all we are looking forward to now is excellence. As we move ahead, that's what we're looking for. There's no free ride anywhere at all. It's about finding the right people. I'm going to speak about Mr. Wiley after, and maybe I'll mention again the board. But again, it's finding the right competent people to take this this asset, which we all own, towards a state of excellence. And I also looked at the oil and gas investor in another article on the next restructuring wave for oil and gas producers. And I'm not going to speak much about it again, but to say that the article focused on the wave of bankruptcies and restructurings that broke through 2015 and 2016. We're not alone. There are many, that's the point I want to make. There are many countries that have suffered the same fate that we have. And many producers that have filed for bankruptcy and so on. So here we are. But so having taken the decision, BP has expressed, there are many other large interests large stakeholders that have expressed their congratulations for on the taking the bite into restructuring Petrotrin. Touchstone is one of the stakeholders who we deal with, and I can quote Paul Bay, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Touchstone, who said, "We believe this is a difficult but an absolutely necessary step for Petrotrin, and we look forward to work with them as a partner while they transition the business and return to profitability." So I spoke earlier about this new standard that will be introduced, a decision on which a decision has been taken by the, which will be introduced in the year 2020, and that is the IMO's global sulfur cap. And Mr. Vice President, the point is, whether you like it or not, the world is going ahead with it. And the International Maritime Organization on October 27 announced that it was going ahead with a global sulfur cap of 0.5% on marine fuels starting from January 1, 2020. And of course, there were years of uncertainty as to whether this will take place in 2020 or later on. Naturally, there are great concerns about it, but the decision was taken. It's before us, and anybody in the refining business now is going to have to conform, or else you're not going to be able to market your products abroad. So the current global sulfur cap on bunker fuel, for instance, is 3.5%. So it's going to be a big, steep step down. Right? There are going to be tighter specifications with regard to bunker fuel, and of course this has a knock-on effect on the whole global energy system, and including on road fuels. So if not the debt, certainly this is something that we would have had to take into account, and we knew that this was coming. And I think that's the reason why the ultra-low sulfur diesel plant and all of the other upgrades and the GOP and so on was contemplated. And because this decision, however you take it, it will impact. It will impact refiners. It will impact crude producers, bunker suppliers, and we're certainly looking at the bunker industry for Paria. And of course, it's all about the emissions and air quality affecting health. The health of millions of people. So again, and in that, I reviewed that particular article, and they were saying as well, this really would have huge implications, in particular for simple refineries. I think about, I'm not an engineer, I don't understand the industry enough, but I didn't think that we were that simple. But I think about refineries like Jamaica, for instance, which is in fact a simple refinery, and I really shudder to think whether or not they will survive. I mean, I think there's going to be some great difficulty for Jamaica with regard to their existing refinery, which I know is small and it's also a little bit aged. But, and perhaps for the more complex refineries, they would probably be able to take advantage of it. So that's not our business anymore. It really will now be the business for the person who is successful in terms of the RFP, which will go out to the international market for our refinery assets. But again, the capital cost would be massive and so on. I think we had a plan, but the point is, with all of the delays and so on, and the complexities with the ULSD plant, we just never technically were able to conquer it. There's just no way we could have coped with what is to come in 2020. And is there going to be some, will the world stick to the deadline? Yes. The big players are saying, yes, they can cope. And BP has said that compliance with the rule in 2020 is technically and commercially feasible, and therefore that is going to be the status quo. There are those who will be able to cope with it, and I'm quite pleased that we are not in a position to be able to not just cope, but certainly compete. So I wanted to speak a little bit about the Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited. I think the Minister would have spoken about the exploration and production. So that the Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, I think will be very profitable. There's a vision and a value proposition for Paria, and the vision is to be the preferred and reliable supplier of petroleum products to the local and regional markets, and offer efficient, cost-effective terminal and bunkering services to all customers, and to deliver premium shareholder value while becoming the employer of choice and a source of pride for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So there's a lot to look forward to in terms of the Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, with a vision like that, with the business model that has been developed, will focus on safe, on responsible and efficient terminal operations in order to deliver crude oil and condensate and petroleum products to customers with superior service. So there's a lot to look forward to. Even in terms of the Caribbean, I'll tell you that last week, that on the agenda is certainly not just servicing Trinidad and Tobago, but the Caribbean market. And it's a small market, but it can be very valuable to us now in that particular type of business. The market is so small, it's less than 0.3% of the total world demand. And the complexities are that the diverse range of product specifications and varying requirements are a lot to deal with, but all of what they require also in very, very small quantities. And most of these smaller islands will have very limited storage space as well, storage and terminal facilities, so that what you will find is that there's frequent movement of cargo to all of these islands. And but Paria has available to it specialized shipping and multi-port logistics to support the multi-product small parcel sizes. And I want to tell you that last week when we were at the Quartet meeting, we would have made an approach to be able to bring in these refined products tariff-free. And that concession was granted for all but one of the products, but it was also granted to all of the other countries. But what it means for us is that we are now going to go out there and act on a very commercial basis to market the products. Of course, I think, and the Minister of Energy could correct me, but I think that over the more than 100 years of being in the business, I'm sure that we understand very well who the major traders are and so on. I'm sure that we've been in communication with them. We've already brought in the early shipments and so on. And I have every faith that we would be able to market ourselves to the region, and that this supply to the region would be, in fact, a very profitable one. Again, Paria's mandate will be crude handling and loading, product trading and marketing, delivery, distribution, bunkering, leasing opportunities, and the products which they will trade in motor gasoline, kerosene, gas oil and diesel, bunker fuel oil services, storage and handling of crude oil and products, marketing, trading and bunkering and so on. The storage and delivery facilities at Paria are second to none, and there are vessels that can handle up to 120,000 tons, and currently they have the ability to handle approximately 70 vessels per month. There are 7 berths that can accommodate multiple loadings and discharge, and so on. And refined product storage capacity in excess of 3 MMB with independent loading and discharge systems. So I say all of this to say that the planning has been done, the activity has started, and we are well poised. Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited will be a profitable entity, and so on. There's security of supply. There are even growth opportunities in terms of leasing additional tankage, and of course looking and expanding the bunker business and so on. So the point about Mike Wiley was addressed by the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. I want to say that he's the right man for the job. I'll tell you from the perspective again. Yes, we're nationalistic. This is global business. You have to understand what we have gotten into. And this is a man who has considerable experience at all levels. He's an engineer by profession, I actually looked at his CV, and he has just come from a company called Kane India Limited, and where he was responsible for the managing the technical and operations group for drilling and petroleum engineering and geoscience and so on. He was also the president of Cascade Petroleum in the Greater Denver area. He has enormous experience, and that's what we need at this time. I'm not saying that perhaps eventually a national cannot do the job that is required, but at this time, this is what this is what we require. We went out into the international market, and I think that I trust that the board has made a very good choice, and we're well on our way under Mr. Wiley's guidance.
Government business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, in accordance with Standing Order 14.5, I beg to move that the Senate continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the Senate continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand.
Before you put the question, sir, including, sir, 2 matters on the motion. Could I?
Leader of Government Business?
Yes. That includes the business at hand.
So I'll put the question again. Honourable Senators, the question is that the Senate continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand, including the matters on the adjournment. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The Senate will continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand. Minister?
So I was speaking about the suitability of the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Wiley, and just to finish that point, that he is really a top exploration executive in the U.S. He was, and I sort of look at the salary ranges for such persons in the U.S., and I want to say that typically what has been offered to him and what has been given to him really is well between the range that one expects for someone with his of his caliber and who has the kind of job description which he has to take the company forward. Generally, and I'm not going to go much longer, but at the end of the day, what we have before us, the primary core purpose and objective of this group of companies really has not changed. From the point of view that the core purpose is to monetize this country's crude resources. That has always been so, and that remains so. But of course, what do I want to see? The business model is what has changed and what was necessary to be changed as well. And their core purpose is also to give a fair return to its shareholders. Petrotrin in its previous incarnation was not in a position to do that. As I said, they were owing something like $3.4 billion to the people of this country in the form of taxes and royalties. But that's a core purpose, to monetize the assets, to give a fair return to the shareholders in the form of royalties and taxes, and to generally make a contribution to society. So all in all, there are opportunities there for many of the staff members who had been employed in the old Petrotrin. There are opportunities there. All of the advertisements for employment would have been out in the public domain. Many persons would have applied, and the persons with the right skills. It's been such a mammoth task. The persons with the right skills will have an opportunity once again to serve with diligence to ensure that this is going to be a profitable entity. Generally, this industry change, to shake up, might have appeared troubled maybe 3 months ago, 6 months ago or so. But I want to assure everyone that if they listen to us and they pay attention to all that has been communicated to them, there's a bright future ahead. With the right strategies in place and the correct business model, there is a bright future ahead. And this is nothing abnormal. As I said, whatever the business type, strategy is important. and recognizing when your business model needs to change. Very, very important. Only yesterday, I would have been at the opening of the 10th Pennywise store and 5th pharmacy. And what that was about, their core purpose didn't change, which is to provide personal care products to the population at a reasonable price. So their purpose and core business didn't change, but their strategies are not changed, but have been extended. In other words, there are new strategies. And that's what companies have to do, regardless of what business you're in. Completely rethink and look at new strategies. And their new strategy, when they opened that store at Long Circular, was to move not to move away, but to enter the market in the northwestern part of Trinidad and Tobago. It's just a strategy. Continually thinking, looking for ways and means of improving your business. And it really would have been imprudent of us to continue in the same mode that we were operating for the sake of jobs. Yes, jobs, but not at the cost to the population. Not with the humongous debt of I think it's $13 billion. I said, not requiring the $25 billion to be pumped in, when that $25 billion could be spent on other things, hospitals and roads and so on. And there are many other projects where jobs will be created, and particularly in the Southland, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President. So this is all about competitiveness, sustainability, strategy, the right business model, reinventing yourselves. It's about leadership. And finally, what I think we've done makes financial sense, and with the right technology, as I said, and so on, and the right decisions, right persons, and so on, I think that, again, the future is bright. So I want to thank you for this intervention, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Vice President, thank you very much.
Before I call the next speaker, just permit me to join with the Minister of Trade and Industry in congratulating Senator Teemal on his maiden contribution in the Senate. Senator Ameen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. As I begin my contribution on this bill, entitled An Act to Vest Certain Assets of the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, Guaracara Refinery Company Limited. I begin by acknowledging today, November 20th, as the United Nations Day, Universal Children's Day. And as mentioned by other members, and on behalf of the opposition bench, I want to acknowledge the value of our children in our nation, and certainly the value of having a universal day for children as designated by the United Nations. And I see several members on the opposite bench who are in blue today in acknowledgement of the day of Universal Children's Day. And it's ironic, Mr. Vice President, because we are debating a bill in which the government has essentially, or is essentially, attempting to, or in fact, because this is a simple majority that is required, we are debating a bill that will destroy the patrimony of the children of Trinidad and Tobago. So while it's all well and good to wear blue, or wear red, and wear red, white, and black, that does not signify your dedication to the children of your nation, or wearing red doesn't signal your dedication to patriotism to Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, the closure of Petrotrin can now be added to a long list of broken promises and reasons for this population not to trust the present government. I heard members today repeating what members of the government have been saying with regards to the profitability of Petrotrin, with regards to the review and their intention, as though they had no choice in this matter. The speaker before me even mentioned the Solomon report, the McKinsey report, there was the Lashley report as well. And again, I am asking, and we continue to ask from the opposition bench, which one of those reports, or which report anywhere else, recommended the closure of Petrotrin? So you come to the nation as though your back is against the wall, when the truth is that those reports gave recommendations on how to get things right. And no efforts were made to do that. And the decision was a political decision to shut down Petrotrin and to dismantle the union and to disempower the people of that sector. Mr. Vice President, before this whole scenario, the Prime Minister, the Honorable Prime Minister, on more than one occasions on political platforms and into the media, when asked, said that Petrotrin will not be shut down. Today they have replaced the word shut down, but quite frankly, it is really the same thing. And I want to mention, Mr. Vice President, today they are coming to us to say, listen, we had no choice. And now because of their decision, thousands are jobless. Months ago, Mr. Vice President, when this whole Petrotrin restructuring issue began, the opposition signaled a warning to employees of TSTT, T&Tech, WASA. Be careful, you may be next. And the government accuses us of fear-mongering. But just a few days ago, a letter to the Secretary General of the Communication Workers Union, Mr. Clyde Elder, was published in the newspaper, where the government indicated its intention to restructure TSTT. And that letter included a list of jobs that would be made redundant consequent to the implementation of a new structure. You know what that means? More job losses, more people being fired by this PNM government just in time for Christmas. So while they continue every time we raise these issues to try to make the public discredit the opposition, the truth will eventually come to light. And that is what is happening. The Minister of Public Utilities, I'm sure we'll discuss the TSTT promises on another occasion. But Mr. Vice President, in my contribution, I want to go in a slightly different direction. Many of the arguments in the public domain usually surround the legal matters, the formation of the company, the legality of the actions of the government or the illegality of those actions. People bring arguments around the economy, the implication on the national economy, the cost of this mothballing or shutting down of Petrotrin. We talk about energy management, energy industry, and of course we cannot talk about this situation without talking about the deception of the population by the government. But Mr. Vice President, the care of human life and the well-being of citizens is the ultimate object of a good government. A good government is one of the most important factors in economic growth and social well-being. And by this standard, Mr. Vice President, the PNM is not a good government. I want to talk about people, about the social well-being of our citizens. And in my contribution, I intend to examine the social implications of the bill before us and what the in this regard, I will touch on health and medical well-being as it pertains to the Petrotrin, the vesting of the company and the employees, education and the education facilities that fall within the Petrotrin's assets that will also be vested. Housing and land regularization, while some of it was touched on by my colleagues, I want to go into a different perspective. Unemployment, the effect on the local and informal economy that I don't think anyone has mentioned. And I, of course, as a person coming from local government, I also want to touch on some concerns that I encountered during my time as a local government rep that you may not think could be linked to the closure of Petrotrin. Mr. Vice President, with regards to education, there are 3 schools on the Petrotrin lands which were maintained by Petrotrin. And I intended to ask Mr. Vice President of the government's intention with regards to the management of those schools, the continued maintenance of the grounds, the status of the St. Peter's private school and the gymnasium and so on. And there's the Beach Camp private school as well, which is mainly attended by children of employees of Petrotrin and paid for by the company. By the time when I, since that I would have had glance of this document, that is the note for cabinet mentioned by my colleague Senator Ramdeen, and I did take the opportunity to peruse some of the schedule attached, which from my understanding, indicates the properties that will remain vested in Petrotrin. And the St. Peter's School, the gymnasium, the Anglican Church, and so on, those remain vested in Petrotrin. And this is something I want us to just put a little flag by, because these are educational institutions, and we have to ask ourselves, what will remain the business of Petrotrin? If you are leaving it as a shell company, you have all these properties that will remain vested in Petrotrin. What will be the role of the new Petrotrin in going forward? And I think we have to make a firm decision with regards to the school, the education institutions, and later on I want to talk about some other training facilities and training programs. Mr. Vice President, one of the other properties that is to remain in Petrotrin, now Petrotrin, the new Petrotrin, is the Augustus Long Hospital and its grounds. So then are we to assume then, Mr. Vice President, that the staff will be retained? What is the plan for this hospital and the other health facilities? There are at least 3 health facilities on Petrotrin lands. This hospital, I know in the other place, it was suggested that this is a small facility. It is a 49-bed facility, and there are so many other hospitals in Trinidad and Tobago that could pick up the slack. And it sounded as though the government intended to stop all operations at that Augustus Long Hospital. Yes, it is a 49-bed facility. It is fairly small. It is a very well-established facility, and it does have some aged infrastructure. But, Mr. Vice President, in 2013, that Augustus Long Hospital underwent significant upgrades at a considerable cost to Petrotrin. And this refurbishment included a new operating theater and a modern high-dependency unit. This medical facility, in my view, should be included in a restructuring plan to maintain Petrotrin's commitment to its employees, its retirees, and its families, and to avoid the existing medical staff there from having to lose their jobs. So the government has not indicated their clear intention with that hospital, but from just judging from the gist of the comments made, particularly by the Prime Minister in the other place on this matter, it sounded as though they had no intention of continuing the operation, and I want to beg them to reconsider that. That hospital is very well placed geographically to be a leading provider for additional clinical services, as well as to become a leader in industrial medical care and emergency medical care for any sort of industrial injuries or accidents within that Point 14 Point-a-Pierre industrialized area. And that's even more so since the government has refused to open the Couva Hospital, the Couva Children's Hospital, that is also in that vicinity, that has a significant capacity. Mr. Vice President, I want to move to a matter which was mentioned by one of my colleagues that has to do with the demolition of squatters in Santa Flora. The People's National Movement has always had a very callous approach to squatters, and squatter regularization has not been a thing that they have really pursued with any vigor. The report in the newspaper and in the news with regards to the demolition, which was mentioned by my colleague Senator Obika, indicated that the persons whose homes were demolished, one of the persons interviewed is actually a fired employee, that the persons indicated a willingness to purchase the lands, which they occupied for between 10 and 15 years. And the irony is that one of the newspaper's articles said that attempts to contact Petrotrin were futile. You know, people get fired, man. So I don't know who they are expecting to respond from Petrotrin. I don't know if the board would be responding to this matter, but I think it is worthy of the government's attention. And more so because you are dealing with lands vested in Petrotrin that are occupied not only by shacks and shuttle homes, if you want to call it that, not squatters in the vile sense of that the government is trying to portray. But the fact is that many of the parcels of lands vested in Petrotrin over the past few decades have been occupied by people's homes, by schools, by health centers, by supermarkets, food places, roads that have become public roadways. Religious institutions. Many churches as well, churches, mosques, temples, we have different religious places of worship, offices, even, private commercial buildings as well as government offices. And I take this opportunity to call on the government to immediately cease demolition and to take a more humane approach in dealing with the land occupation on Petrotrin lands. The land issue must be regularized and sorted before you take that approach, because what is good for one has to be good for all. And if the government has to take a strict approach with demolishing structures that did not get approval, that are on Petrotrin lands, you'll be in for some serious legal challenge. So the unfortunate thing is that the poor man does get it first. And the family who has a board house that is easy to demolish with a tractor is the one who does get it first. And those families, those 5 families, I call on the government to treat with the relocation and the proper housing of those families and provide them with accommodation and an option if the lands are available or other lands are available for them to be properly relocated. Mr. Vice President, I also want to mention, as I speak of the situation with this former employee with regards to the land regularization, there are other matters concerning the welfare and well-being of former employees that require urgent attention of the government while they are doing this, while they consider this act to vest the assets of Petrotrin into these three companies. The medical plan for the employees, Mr. Vice President, there is a new proposed plan that is supposed to cover the workers for a period of 24 months. I think it's a surgical plan. I don't know how they determined, how they selected surgical or whatever, but the fact is that when these employees and their families, their spouses, and even retirees of Petrotrin, they would be invited to join a new plan after that period expires, right? But these persons, their family, the employees, as well as their dependents, when they went in to become, when they became employees and they became a part of these medical plans, they expected coverage for the rest of their life. And as a result, they would not have had the need to have any other medical plans outside of the one provided by the company. Now that you have this unforeseen shutdown of the company, and you have this situation where they are going on a plan that will expire in 24 months, many of those employees, and particularly the elderly ones and the retirees, would be without medical insurance. And even if they can get insurance externally, the premiums would be very exorbitant due to their age, and of course some of them would have developed medical conditions and so on that would increase their premium. We have to consider that these promises, these arrangements that were made to cover employees, we have to find alternative arrangements to humanely treat with these going forward. The same applies, something very similar applies to the pension plan that was mentioned by the Minister, the Honorable Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. During the response to a question earlier in the session, the Honorable Minister indicated more or less that the pension plan would mature by virtue of early retirement of the employee. In today's Guardian, however, there's an article by Renuka Singh where Republic Bank is saying that the Petrotrin plan is not fully funded. And Mr. Vice President, the Republic Bank, who are trustees of the Petrotrin employee pension plan, has expressed concern over the company's attempt to change the provisions of the plan as it is winding down. And they indicated that if the plan had been wound up, benefits to all the pensioners would be secure in full, but only 60% of the benefits for non-pensioners would be secure. So that it would require, and Mr. Vice President, again, if you had the management and the board of Petrotrin taking these things into consideration, speaking to their partners, speaking to Republic Bank as the trustee for their employee pension plan, they could have made a better plan going forward. And this article, which is based on a letter from Republic Bank to Petrotrin, is a result of no planning, no consultation, and no care for the employees. Again, a very callous move, and it could be out of neglect, but it really shows callousness in terms of the treatment of the employees. Another area that I want to touch on has to do with, again, with the welfare of employees. Mr. Vice President, it is often a sign of personal success and progress in your life if you become a homeowner, or when you become a homeowner. Many workers who would have been earning enough to enter into a mortgage. In some cases, you have two persons in the household who are employees of Petrotrin. If you have one, it's the main breadwinner. In the recent flooding, you had many HDC homes where occupiers had mortgages. They were granted a moratorium for, it was a 2-month deferral something, right? It was a little mamaga in my opinion, but the fact is that such an arrangement can be made. And I think that the government should be considering or should be making an offer for employees of Petrotrin who are engaged in, who are in mortgage arrangements to have some type of arrangement made for them with the state, to include the state and their financial institutions, to give them that a little space, to provide them with a space of, if it is at least 2 years or so. So for example, if it is agreed that they have a period of 2 years where they would not have to make the mortgage payments, of course they would make it later on at the end of the mortgage. But if they become meaningfully employed before that, they can resume. But the government, I think, in my opinion, should be able to engage with the state financial institutions and private financial institutions to find ways to provide families with support so that families will not have to sell their homes. I personally know couples who are both well qualified and who, because unless they find a job that provides that type of income within the next few months, they may have to sell their homes. And no one of us would want to be in a position to have to lose our homes. I also want to touch on Mr. President, Vice President. There are many, just as I mentioned earlier, the fact that there are many structures on Petrotrin land. This also extends to small businesses and small commercial ventures. It happens in every municipality where somebody would come, they start off vending on a table, and then they put up a tent, and then they cast a little hole and put for the tent, and next, before you know it, they have a shed, and then they put up some blocks around the shed, and they end up in a building. Then there are many commercial ventures that start off like this, a very small venture. Might be a lady selling pies or a man selling snow cone, but it grows and the business grows. There are many structures like these on Petrotrin property. And it is not only the structure that has to be dealt with, because the fact is that the local economy in the areas that were that house Petrotrin activities, and you had so many workers and so on, will be virtually destroyed. And this, of course, means that there are a number of households that would be indirectly affected by the closure of Petrotrin. People who were not employees of Petrotrin, but who were employees of small businesses, the roti lady, the people who provide, well, let me just say the food industry on a whole, people provided meals, people provided tools and so on, and other small contractors. And you also had, I think, you have a number of women, single mothers, who are female breadwinners, who will be negatively affected. My question is, you have started to break down people, structures rather, on Petrotrin land. And where would those people stand? Mr. Vice President, there's an issue with regards to the, there are so many organizations that have been over the years been either fully sponsored or partially sponsored by Petrotrin that has contributed to the development of those communities, what Petrotrin calls their fence line communities. I don't need to read out the list, but Mr. Vice President, my concern on the social impact of, well, first of all, we don't know if these sponsorships will remain in place. Certainly, I'm sure they will be affected in some way negatively, if not to stop completely. My concern is that the young people who play in the pan, the steel pan, the people who are involved in the all the other cultural efforts, the TASA groups, the La Reine Rive and all the other things, Calypso competitions, village councils, schools even, who get sponsorship. My concern is that the young people in particular, but the people in general, that the impact of not having those activities, not having those organizations to constructively engage them, could lead to them the idle hands, devil's workshop, could lead to social ills. I don't want to say crime. I don't just want to go off on crime, but crime is one of the social ills that could result if you have discontinuance of these opportunities where the social thing. I intend to go a little more into that when we deal with the motion. We have a motion coming up next week on private members' motion, and I intend to go a little more into that, Mr. Vice President. However, I want to touch on education and training. The Minister of Energy spoke, in his contribution, spoke highly about Petrotrin in regards to its training, indirectly. He said that a person who was trained in Trinidad and Tobago's petroleum industry is marketable any part of the world because they are well trained. And training and development is a big part of Petrotrin's development component. In addition to that, you also had sponsorship of the Global Young Leaders Conference. You had their program, the Petrotrin themselves had a graduate trainee program, a craft apprenticeship program, refinery operator apprenticeship programs. These programs, the training of these, not only these specific training, but training in general in the petroleum industry, which one of these companies is going to pick up that responsibility? What will be the impact on the development skills within the national community? And of course, our human resource capital and our ability to export talent. That is something that I think we have to address if we want to continue to boast about Trinidad and Tobago and about our skills in that industry. Mr. Vice President, as we speak of vesting lands into these other companies, I want to mention an experience that I had as chairman of Tunapuna-Piako Regional Corporation. The Orange Grove Estate, which was part of the Caroni 1975 Limited, is essentially the area south of the Churchill-Roosevelt Highway. And if you are traveling towards the airport, it's the area opposite the Trinity Mall, where Blue Waters and so on is. After the closure of Caroni 1975 Limited, that land had essentially been abandoned. The lands were vested into the special purpose companies under the previous PNM administration. And when we came into government, when the UNC came into government in 2010, shortly after, there was a change there was a local government election, and the UNC won about 9 or so of the corporations, and Tunapuna-Piako was one. We were experiencing a lot of flooding in the Trinity Mall, a lot of flooding in the Orange Grove development north of the highway, and a lot of flooding generally north of the Churchill-Roosevelt Highway. And there were so many people who were saying, Chairman, you need to break the cylinders under the highway, you need to widen the bridge. And together with the Minister of Works, well, it was Works and Local Government at that time, Dr. Rambachan, all the regional corporations embarked on a stringent program to clear those water courses that had been neglected for, well, quite some time, more than a decade. And just clearing those earthen water courses to take the water away from the built-up areas meant that we had no flood after that for at least 2 or 3 years. Maybe the present Minister of Works could take some notes. But we have had, since then, we have had neglect of those water courses again, and we are seeing flooding in some of those areas. But, Mr. Vice President, my concern, I raise this because my concern is that many of these lands that are maintained by Petrotrin, where they would take responsibility for clearing water courses, for example, catchment areas and any infrastructure related to irrigation, if that maintenance program is no longer continued, even if the lands are vested in a special purpose company, if they do not have a rigorous maintenance program, you would end up with dramatic increases in flooding, and particularly at this time where we are seeing so much rainfall and we are already seeing so many areas being flooded. I'm concerned with regards to the discontinuance of the Petrotrin maintenance system on those water courses in those areas. And the question is whether the Ministry of Works has any plans, whether the Ministry of Local Government has any plans to pick up the slack there. Mr. Vice President, you know, I was really looking forward to the contribution of the Minister of Trade because I felt so many of these matters with regards to Petrotrin would be of interest to that ministry. And I particularly thought that I would have heard about the price to import refined fuel. I think this is a question that remains on the lips of many people in Trinidad and Tobago, and it remains unanswered by this government to date. Even in the
Prime Minister danced around the answer.
Even in the other place, even in the media, it seems as though the members of the government are deliberately avoiding this question. And this is because the answer would either reveal a truth or a lie. The answer would hold them accountable to what they have been saying. They are talking about Petrotrin running at a loss and that all these things are going to magically run at a profit, I suppose. But the fact is that you have to be a little more transparent to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to endorse, there are at least 2 members on the independent bench who asked about further information. Where's your business plan? You speak about your business model changing, but the fact is you have not really brought forward a plan to the nation. I don't even think you even have a plan for yourself. And this is not the first instance where the PNM does not have a plan. So I am not surprised. But Mr. Vice President, you know, I was a little taken aback. I thought the speaker before me got a little emotional about a matter.
Senator, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Vice President, I just pulled up an article. And it is a Newsday article dated in the 12th of January 2013. And the title is Judge Throws Out Paula. Opposition PNM Point Fortin MP Paula Gopee-Scoon has been ordered by a High Court judge to vacate a bungalow owned by a state entity, Petrotrin, at Clifton Hill.
So it wasn't
and I just want to read the last part pertaining to the judgment.
It wasn't due to the end.
It wasn't due.
My Lord, when one looks at the matter, there is no defense. Political patronage is not a defense. Oh. This was one of the attorneys, Mr. Deoroop, in the court. Political patronage is not a defense.
So we don't have any bungalows.
Justice Kokaram allowed both sides to discuss the matter, and an agreement was reached with the judge, ratified into an order that Gopee-Scoon deliver the vacant possession of the premises situated at bungalow number at Point Fortin, and so on. This judgment was 5 years ago, February 14th, 2013. 5 years later, still kicking and screaming.
It is in such a
the member of the speaker before me, the Honorable Minister, is standing here today in the Parliament, in the Senate of Trinidad and Tobago, speaking. Well, she clearly disagrees with the judgment, but this was 5 years ago. It was due to me. It was due to me. You should have appealed the decision. Yeah. But the fact is, I have to go on the facts here, right? Mr. Vice President.
I understand that. Okay. As much as I understand that that particular line of reasoning did come up as per a contribution, I'm trying to find out exactly where you're going with it. Yes. Just quickly.
Okay.
Don't take too long.
Thank you. Very quickly, because I only have a few more minutes. But Mr. Vice President, I looked at the reaction of the minister, the Honorable Minister, when she spoke before me, when she's speaking about that it was due to me, it was due to me. And, you know, Mr. Vice President, I wonder if the reaction of the minister to the people whose homes were demolished in Santa Flora last night was the same. So, Mr. Vice President, when you invest in lands and you're deciding to make judgments against people who build homes and who are trying to eke out a living in some cases, just put yourself in the position. And you know what? Ironically, the gentleman from Santa Flora on the television, and the story on CNC3 he was saying something very similar. He also feels that the lands in Santa Flora is due to him. So I hope that you could influence, I hope that the Honorable Minister could influence a cabinet to take a humane approach to the decisions with regards to the lands and not be breaking down people's houses in such a callous manner. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Deyalsingh.
Thank you, Vice President, for giving me the opportunity to speak on this miscellaneous provision bill. First, I'd like to say I should be brief because most of the contribution I had were already mentioned by members on the independence bench, opposition on the other side. So I will just try to be brief. But what I must say is that I thought it was a simple thing, really, to transfer the assets from Petrotrin to Heritage, seeing that it was done before from Trinma and Trintoc. It was, you know, the transferring of the assets were there. But the opposition brought up some points about the land and land ownership, which I think the government will now be, you know, forced to look and address those issues. So very briefly, I would want to say that we were already notified that it was the Universal Children's Day, and I saw people on the other side, and myself, some of us were in blue in commemoration of that day. And even yesterday, I may mention, it was the International Men's Day. So we have 2 days, you know, in sync, one after the other, and it is important points because you have men and you have children. And in the issue of Petrotrin, men who lose their jobs, they tend to feel emasculated. Yeah. You may have a job loss, you cannot tend to your children, your kids, and that in itself, it's a lot of distress that these persons will have. And we are seeing that. We saw it in the Mittal case where even when there was job loss, somebody allegedly committed suicide, and it was actually, you know, stated that it was due to the fallout that they had from their job loss. So looking at the issue, you know, looking at this bill, I wanted to look at 3 issues mainly. The social fallout that we would have had from the closure, or not so closure, the transfer of certain services from Petrotrin to Heritage. Also, the hiring practices and the accountability and transparency, which Senator Vera spoke about, and also Senator Teemal also spoke about the accountability and transparency. Looking at the Lashley report, it's about 5,322 persons, I think, would have been affected by this closure of Petrotrin. And even we had other figures up to 9,000 that I think OWTU had put out for, you know, the other you know, contractors out there, you'd had a greater degree of personnel affected. So we have to factor in that in any case where there's going to be any sort of a job loss, any sort of a closure, we are going to have that fallout from the people. We are going to see greater amount of persons having the stress, depression, adjustment problems, dealing with these issues. And we have to factor that in to any sort of plans that we give. The issue of the problems that, you know, that persons face. Now, the Ministry of Social Services would have had certain programs in place. There are a lot of programs in place, and we commend you for that. And even Labor would have had programs in place to try to see if we can get those persons who have been retrenched or you know, who have been fired, those persons to come into a retraining program. But we are still, we have to realize that we will be missing certain persons who are out there, who have been with a job loss and who will be home and not even coming out, not even seeking treatment, not even seeking help, not even seeking services, because this is how depression comes in society. And with job loss, we have increased.
Senator, honorable senators, due to the number of speakers remaining and the extent of business yet to be completed, I think now is a good time to take a break for some rest and refreshment for about half an hour, so that this House will now stand suspended for half an hour until 9 p.m.